for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 12 o'clock on Wednesday, the 27th of December. Rishi's spring giveaway. It's just been announced just moments ago that the spring budget will take place on March the 6th. The Prime Minister is said to have demanded a gear change on tax. He's looking at axing inheritance tax altogether, shaking up income tax ahead of the next general election. Will it be a bold budget? And Storm Gerrit chaos. The Met Office has issued 9 yellow weather warnings across the UK as travellers are warned of potentially hazardous conditions on road and rail. And shoplifting epidemic. Over 200,000 shoplifting cases went unsolved in just 12 months. That's according to new analysis of official figures. What needs to be done to stop it? And the comedian Ricky Gervais has come under a little bit of fire with his latest Netflix special. It's been labelled deeply problematic. I'll tell you why later in the show, so stay tuned. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Francis in the GB newsroom. The headlines at 12. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced that the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. Well, that comes as reports have been emerging that Downing Street is considering axing inheritance tax and reducing income tax. The move is one of a handful of attention-grabbing pledges that Number 10 hopes will boost Rishi Sunak's chances of a win. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has also suggested to The Times that the party will cut the upfront cost of a home for first-time buyers in a pre-election giveaway. The Prime Minister has said that he intends to call the general election in 2024, but opinion is still split on whether it will come in the spring or the autumn. Well, thousands of travellers are at risk of missing their flights due to multiple signal failures on the rail network. East Midlands Railway said the issue is disrupting services between London St Pancras and Luton Airport. A Thameslink service calling at the airport earlier was delayed by nearly 2 hours. Meanwhile, Christmas rail disruptions are continuing as engineering works take place. London Paddington remains closed, affecting journeys to and from South Wales, Bristol, the West Country and Heathrow Airport. Meanwhile, multiple British Airways flights have been cancelled as Storm Gerrit hits the UK. Strong winds have meant that flights that were due to operate to and from Heathrow have been axed. There are a number of yellow weather warnings for wind and rain across the country, and they're in place for south of England, parts of Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Well, hospital car parking fees in England have risen more than 50% in the last year. That's according to new figures. Visitors and patients spent £146 million for parking in 2022 to 23. That's the equivalent of £400,000 spent in hospital car parks every day. The data, which was uncovered by the Liberal Democrats, also found that parking fees paid by hospital staff has soared more than eightfold. It's up from £5.6 million to more than £46 million. Brits will soon be able to buy a new pint-sized bottle of still or sparkling wine. That's as part of new post-Brexit freedoms. The new size will appear on supermarket shelves as well as pubs, clubs and in restaurants. The government says the move will offer more flexibility and choice for customers. Champagne pint bottles were also sold in the UK up until 1973, when Britain joined the European Common Market. But it stopped as they didn't comply with EU weights and measures. Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Business, Kevin Hollinrake, says the move will benefit everyone.
Well, I think it's a really important change. We used to be able to buy pints of champagne in bottles and wine, for example, before joining the European Union. So I think it's an opportunity for innovation. Churchill's favourite size of bottle. They said it was the right size for lunch for two or for dinner for one. So I think it's a nice innovation and something we can do now we left the European Union.
Well, more than 200,000 shoplifting cases went unsolved in the space of just a year. New figures show that only around 15% of some 362,000 cases were said to have resulted in a suspect being charged. The Liberal Democrats who studied the figures have accused the government of failing to tackle what they call an epidemic. A Home Office spokeswoman said charging rates for shoplifting are up by almost a third in the past year. And the number of people shopping in the Boxing Day sales across the UK was more than a fifth lower than last year. Figures from MRI software found that whilst footfall had been 2.3% higher for figures before 3 p.m, it was significantly lower when recorded across the day as a whole. The group said the busier start on Tuesday was driven by a 6.5% increase in high street visitors, and the only location to experience a rise was central London. This is GB News. We're across the UK on TV, in your car, digital radio and on your smart speaker. Now, though, more from Emily.
Well, thank you for joining me. The breaking news is that the Chancellor has announced when the spring budget will be, and it's going to be March the 6th. So what could be in it? We've also heard that Rishi Sunak could be heading to cut taxes. Could that be in the budget? Could there be some kind of pre-election giveaway that might help with that poll lead, that rather huge poll lead that Labour currently have? Sunak's said to be considering a cut in both income tax as well as a potential axing of inheritance tax altogether. Could this cut Labour's lead in the polls? As I just said, Jeremy Hunt has announced the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. What will it contain? I'm joined by GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, very nice to speak to you. So we've just heard the spring budget will be on March the 6th. Lots of work will be put into this. Is it going to be a bold one?
Well, I think it probably is going to be a bold one. It feels very much now as though we are gearing up for an election. There's increasing talk in Westminster that election could be as early as May 2024 rather than September, October 2024, as had previously been predicted. There was a little hint of that in the autumn statement, which was delivered a couple of months ago. Jeremy Hunt cut national insurance tax, a 2p cut to national insurance, which was a pretty big cut, and introduced emergency legislation to bring forward that tax cut to January rather than April, when a tax cut like that is normally implemented. That got tongues wagging in Westminster that the Conservatives were preparing the ground for a spring election. Now we're hearing that the budget is going to take place in early March, and we're beginning to hear a few leaks about the sort of policies that the Conservatives might put in it. Scrapping inheritance tax has always been very, very popular among Conservative backbenchers, and actually polls really well with the public as well. There are those who find that quite surprising, because actually only a very small percentage of the population will benefit from a cut to inheritance tax. But interestingly, a much larger proportion of the population think that they will benefit to a cut in inheritance tax. So some say that it's quite a good policy for the Conservatives to be talking about. It's quite cheap for the Treasury, but polls very well. They're also talking about, Michael Gove is talking about bringing in a longer-term fixed rate mortgages, something like 30-year fixed-term mortgages. That's something that's already very common in the US, but not something we've seen in Britain before. Obviously, that would take a lot of pressure off those taking out mortgages. Also talk about scrapping stamp duty. Really interesting to see whether or not they go for that. Again, it would benefit on the whole those in London and the South East, because it only affects properties over 425,000. What I think most people will be looking for, or what they should be looking for in that budget, is whether or not Jeremy Hunt raises the threshold at which income tax is charged. Because at the moment it has been frozen for such a long time at the 25,000 and 50,000 tax bracket. It's been frozen that for such a long time that all sorts of people, public sector workers, have been pulled into higher tax brackets. That's known as a stealth tax, a way of the government taxing people more without actually having to put it on paper. If Jeremy Hunt does cut that, then that might give the Conservatives a bit of a boost in the polls. But obviously at this stage, with an election just round the corner, it's hard to imagine what kind of rabbit he could pull out of the hat which would save things.
Yes, exactly. But it's interesting, inheritance tax. We hear time and time again that maybe the Conservatives might axe it, they might reduce it substantially. Whether it happens is another thing. But if it did, that would be a clear dividing line between the Conservatives and the Labour Party, because the Labour Party also wants to see income taxes go down, or at least they say they do. But inheritance tax, that is one thing the Labour Party will not stand by, surely.
Well, absolutely. This would be a really obvious way for Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak to get some clear blue water between themselves and Labour. Obviously, traditionally, the Conservatives are on their strongest ground when talking about tax. But in the last few years, that hasn't been the case at all. As we keep hearing, Britain's tax burden is the highest it's been since the Second World War. It seems now, with all this talk about various different types of tax cuts, as though the Conservative government have decided that the only possible way to potentially maybe stand a hope of clutching back victory from the jaws of defeat is to begin by cutting taxes. And perhaps they're thinking, where better to start than inheritance tax, where Labour has made its feelings plainly known.
Yes, Olivia, and I wonder where this is coming from, whether this is being led by Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, or Rishi Sunak. In the papers today, Rishi Sunak, a gear change is what he wants when it comes to tax, or so sources are saying. Is this being led by Rishi Sunak, who wants a low tax, smaller state economy going forward? Jeremy Hunt, known for being more cautious. Is it Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, who is leading the way on this tax cutting, potentially?
I'm not sure. I mean, Jeremy Hunt, yes, he has been cautious recently. But actually, if you remember, when he was standing to be leader both times, tax cutting was really at the heart of his economic agenda. And actually, Rishi Sunak was seen to be more cautious. So I reckon it's probably both of them sort of walking in lockstep at this stage. When Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister last year and inherited Jeremy Hunt as his Chancellor, they both did say that what they planned to do was try and cut inflation down before cutting taxes. Now, what they will be saying now, what we will definitely hear Jeremy Hunt saying in that spring budget, is that they have managed to cut inflation. They have managed to get that number down to something like 4%. Obviously, the Bank of England's target is 2%, so there's still a way to go, but they have managed to halve it this year. And they will say that that means they now have headroom, as they call it, to begin to cut some taxes. They'll say that this was the plan all along, although quite a lot of Westminster watchers will think that it's throwing a bit of red meat perhaps to their tax-cutting backbenchers in the run-up to this election.
And I'm sure most people would very much enjoy a tax cut, of course, but many will point to public services not being in a very healthy state, not least the NHS, also our education system as well, always needing more money. Will the Labour Party likely go on that line, saying it's all well and good having tax cuts, but what about the crumbling public services that need to be funded?
Really interesting question. I think that, yes, definitely we will hear a lot about NHS waiting lists. That was one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges at the beginning of this year, get NHS waiting lists down. And arguably, that's the one where he has most obviously failed. NHS waiting lists are at something like 7.7 million. And obviously with strikes on and off all of 2023, doctor strikes heading into 2024, those waiting lists don't look set to shrink anytime soon. Will Labour go on the attack and say we can't afford to start cutting taxes, look at the state of the NHS, or will Keir Starmer want to appeal to that centre ground again and present himself as a tax-cutting politician too? I suspect the latter. I don't think Keir Starmer will go in on ideology and start talking about how the NHS has to be properly funded at this stage. I think he will actually tack closer to what the Conservatives are talking about and show that he too is interested in cutting taxes. That's the sort of trajectory that Keir Starmer has been on, getting further and further towards the centre.
And as we know, they're putting together their manifesto as we speak, so we'll see what's in there when it comes to tax and spend policy. Thank you very much indeed, Olivia Utley, GB News' political correspondent. So let's get a bit of a political view too. I'm joined by Charlie Rowley, who's a former special advisor to Michael Gove. Charlie, always great to see you. So the budget, the spring budget, will be on March the 6th. What can we expect?
Well, good afternoon, Emily, and thank you for having me. And I think what you will see is another step towards delivering on Conservative principles. You've heard, as you were just talking about, home ownership, something a very Conservative aspiration, the potential to cut inheritance tax or to scrap inheritance tax. But I think in the budget you will see the start of tax cuts, something that people right across the Conservative Party, Conservative supporters have been calling for some time. And I think that will be something that the Chancellor will be able to deliver. He'll be able to proudly stand at the dispatch box and say that at the start of the year, the Prime Minister set out 5 priorities, 3 on the economy, and one of those was halving inflation, because inflation was what was really impacting on the cost of living, on people's pound in their pocket. But since inflation, as you were just saying, has come right the way down from about 11% now to just over about 2-3% now, he will be able to say, because of all the hard work that has gone into delivering on one of the Prime Minister's top priorities, we can now pass that on to the British people.
I'm sure that's what he would say, Charlie, but is inheritance tax the right priority? We're seeing from some Conservative MPs, not least Jonathan Gullis, who's often on this show, he says there are many other taxes hitting working people at the moment that could be reviewed way before inheritance tax.
Well, I know Jonathan well. He's a great man, but I think he would agree with me that inheritance tax is something that is an aspirational thing that the Conservative Party would want to see get rid of. So it's all about opportunity and making sure that, look, people who have worked hard all of their lives, that have paid a lot of tax on some of their assets, the idea that when you work hard and save and you have something that you want to pass on to your family and future generations, the idea that the government should then have even more say to tax some of that is just anti-aspirational. And I think that's why, as I say, Jonathan would probably agree with me, and why, yes, it might not impact on an awful lot of people across the country, but in the idea of having the state involved in taking back something that people have worked hard for, that they just want to pass on to their children and future generations, I think it will be a welcome move by every Conservative.
Yes, it is true that a lot of people see inheritance tax. They view it with much disdain, let's say. Now, the Labour Party, they're writing up their manifesto, working on their policy proposals, what they're going to put to the country. I imagine that they'll look at the government and after the budget, if there are these big tax cuts, they'll point to public services not being in such a fit shape. How can the government balance money for public services, the NHS, the education system, the military, etc., and also make these tax cuts?
Well, you're absolutely right. That's the challenge that the government absolutely faces. And I think as part of the budget, there was talk in some of the newspapers today about having a spending review, a 3-year spending review, which would tie the hands effectively of the next government. And that would be a decision then, if it is going to be, well, the Labour Party will have to decide whether they commit to those Conservative spending proposals. You'll recall, and your viewers will know, back in 1997, Gordon Brown and Tony Blair made the pledge that they would stick to John Major's last budget and spending proposals, because they wanted to offer economic certainty and assurance to markets and consumers and the British public. So whether this Labour Party under this leader, Sir Keir Starmer, continues with whatever spending proposals come forward under this current government remains to be seen. But ultimately, you're absolutely right. You know, we have had such a high tax burden for a long period of time. A lot of that is down to COVID. There are a number of issues that have been identified because of COVID within our public services that need to be addressed. So I think that whilst there has been the investment, it is now right, as we move beyond COVID, as we can offer tax cuts to people, that there has to be reform within those public services, particularly those bigger spending departments.
Yes, a lot of people will say, you know, the Conservatives have been in power for rather a long time now, and if they wanted to reform public services, they would have done so by now, rather than months before the next general election. But isn't it the case, really, Charlie, that whatever Jeremy Hunt does on March the 6th, whatever rabbits he manages to pull out of the hat, it's not really going to have enough of an impact? If you look at the polls at the moment, I mean, 20 points behind Labour. It's a lost cause, Charlie?
Well, I would never say that, Emily, as you know, and maybe that's because I'm signed up to the cause of government that I used to work in, so that's a disclaimer for your viewers there. I'm sure they already know. But you're absolutely right. But I think, look, the story that the Conservatives will have to tell versus the Labour Party, who will say, as you've just articulated, that they've been in for 13 years, it's time for change. What the Tories will have to say, I think, is, look, go back to 2010. You had 5 years of a coalition. The government was held down and held back by those pesky Liberal Democrats, as the Tories would say. We then had a few years of debate around Brexit, which didn't allow perhaps the government to get on and do the things that it might have wanted to do. You then had COVID. You've then had a number of successive prime ministers because of those issues. Only now, post-COVID, only now with a growing economy, you have a former Chancellor, who is the now Prime Minister, who has set out 5 clear priorities. He's delivering on halving inflation. We'll have to see where debt comes down. The economy is growing slowly but surely, but
well, Charlie, you know as well as I do that inflation is down across the Western world and Europe. It may not be down to Jeremy Hunt, though. Policies could have made it worse, that's for sure. Just lastly, while I've got you, Keir Starmer, he's putting together some kind of policy to rival the Rwanda plan, which isn't exactly taking off. Offshoring. Do you think he'll come up with something in time for the manifesto?
No. Because I think what people in this country want to see is a strong deterrent. The whole point of Brexit and what people right across this country do care about is fairness, but it was about taking back control of our own borders. And we know that migration, illegal migration in particular, is an issue that's happening right across Western Europe. You don't just appear in France, in Calais, and arrive at Dover through a small boat crossing. People have made a journey right across Europe, which means you need to work with European counterparts to, yes, prevent that journey, but also, when people do come into this country illegally, you do need a deterrent. You do need to stop those boats coming over. You need to reduce those numbers whilst breaking up those criminal gangs. It's not as easy as just to say that we'll identify you at a foreign border and process a claim there. That won't be enough. And I just appeal to people to recognise that, look, this is a very, very difficult issue that any government and any party will have to grapple with. But, the civil servants in the Home Office and people at Border Force, they will always remain, I'm afraid to say at times, the same. So if this was something that could have been done, I'm sure it would have been explored. It would already be up and running. So I think it is I'm afraid to say it won't work by the Labour Party. And I think they will eventually have to see, and people will see for themselves, that it's only under the Conservatives that it's delivering.
Of course, for Rishi Sunak, Charlie, very difficult when only a tiny proportion of the public actually believe that the Rwanda plan will get off the tarmac. But thank you, as always, for your time, Charlie Rowley, former Special Advisor to Michael Gove. Always nice to speak to you. Now, you could start your new year with £10,000 in cash, a 500 quid shopping spree and a brand new iPhone. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, here's how you can make all of those prizes yours.
Time is ticking on your chance to become the very first winner of the Great British Giveaway and grab cash, tech and a ton of treats. There's a stunning £10,000 in tax-free cash. What would you spend that on? We'll also give you a tech update with the very latest iPhone 15 Pro Max. And finally, we'll treat you to a shopping spree with £500 in vouchers to spend at the store of your choice. For another chance to win the iPhone, the vouchers and £10,000 cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB01, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 5th of January. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Well, there you go. You've got to be in it to win it, so why not enter? But if you're travelling home after Christmas, it might be a lot harder as Storm Gerrit sweeps across the UK. The Met Office is warning of wintry conditions, heavy rain, strong winds, disruption expected across the country. Joining us now is GB News reporter Jeff Moody, who's in Portsmouth. Jeff, I must ask you, how's the weather?
Actually, it's not too bad at the moment. It's pretty windy, but the rain has held off, but we are expecting worse to come very quickly. The worst hit will be the south coast of England, and particularly along the English Channel here. We're hearing that the RAC is saying be extra careful as you make your journeys home from your Christmas holidays. Be careful try to avoid rural routes if you can, because in these strong winds there's a danger of trees coming down, and they say to try and avoid coastal paths as well. We're hearing that the Isle of Wight ferry that goes from Southampton over to the Isle of Wight has been postponed for the day, as have the hovercraft that go just from over there in Portsmouth across to the island. They've been cancelled as well. So we're also hearing that in Gloucester, one of the bridges is closed there that goes across into Wales. So if you want to go to Wales, you have to go down to the Prince of Wales Bridge and go across on the M4. Plenty of weather warnings in place. They will be clearing fairly early on from the south of England. It's not expected to last all day. We're expecting it to sort of sweep through this afternoon, and by this evening things will be better. But things are beginning to pick up considerably in Wales, Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland too. So if you are heading back from your Christmas break, do be very careful on the roads.
Pictures that we're just seeing of the choppy waters, you certainly should not be going for a dip, because that is what people do at this time of year, isn't it, for a thrill?
Yes, that's right. It's certainly a good idea to avoid the water. I mean, down near Portsmouth, where I am now, there are many, many beaches where people come and they go swimming all times of the year. You know, the whole thing of after Christmas, a good way of sort of getting your health back on track after all that binge eating is going for a cold water dip. But they are being warned to try and avoid that if you possibly can at the moment, because although it doesn't look too bad at the moment, it is certainly getting choppy, and by later on today it could be a lot worse.
Well, we've seen some pictures also from Dover where it does look extremely choppy, very high waters. But thank you very much, Jeff Moody, our GB News reporter from Portsmouth, from a little blustery Portsmouth, I'd say. Now, to discuss this further is meteorologist Jim Dale. Jim, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you had a lovely, restful Christmas. Jim, how bad is this?
Actually, counting snowflakes, or the lack of them. That's my job on Christmas
snowflakes,
Day. But
sadly. That's always a shame. We always have it seems like we always have quite a mild Christmas in this country, but it has been very stormy over recent weeks. Are we experiencing more storms than normal?
Oh, what a question. OK, so the one we're getting at the moment, Gerrit, is number 7 on the list. And the one we're going to get on New Year's Eve, you might not know it, is number 8. That one's going to be called Henk, if it comes to be, and I think it probably will be. So yeah, we're moving up in numbers, certainly. Now, I'm not necessarily attributing all of these to climate change in any shape or form. Sometimes they come as a natural winter storm. We're only a month into winter, so there's plenty of that to come. So Gerrit Jeff was down in Portsmouth. The rain's just about to hit him, actually, in its fullness. But if you go further north, to be honest with you, this is more of a northern and a coastal and a hill mountain storm than it is necessarily at lower levels.
Yes, Jim, I read that it's only the central section of the UK that doesn't have this wind warning.
Yeah, more or less, you're correct, and the rain hasn't even reached East Anglia and properly the southeast yet. So you're right. I think the further north you go, the further west you go, the more conditions are going to be austere and difficult and hazardous. And if you go into Scotland and if you're travelling on the A9, you're going to know about it, because up there it is snow on the Grampians, on the Highlands, in and around those areas. So that's another facet of Storm Gerrit. So yeah, this has rightly been called a storm for the amount of people that are travelling on the road and for the various hazards it's actually bringing, but it probably is not in the category of Kieran earlier in the year.
Jim, what constitutes a storm? How windy does it have to get? Oh, is Jim there? Looks like we've lost Jim. Maybe he's been hit by a power cut. We were being warned that there might be some power cuts and mobile signal coverage might be affected. Jim, is Jim back? No, he's not. He's not. Well, let me know at home if you've been impacted by these weather warnings. It does look like a lot of Britain is braced for some weather turmoil. You've got travellers warned of more delays, potentially hazardous conditions. Just when you don't need it, on your way back from the Christmas holidays, of course, people will be travelling home, and that's the last thing you need. And you can't use the ferry from Isle of Wight either. Jim Dale is back with us, I believe. Jim, you weren't impacted by a power cut?
I got blew away.
Very good. Well, tell me, what constitutes a storm? What level of winds do we have to have before it's called a storm?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, because it's one of those, the element of wind is such a variable thing that you can, it can be called wrong, if you like. I think once you get into severe gale to storm force winds, that's when I think the people in the cupboard at the Met Office come out and decide whether or not it's going to be a named storm. It's always one of those contentious issues. Do you name it? Don't you name it? I think it's best when you get many people on the road, many people traveling at this time of year, that what's the naming of storms does is essentially put it in people's minds that there's something around them that you need to be aware of and you need to take note of, and preventative action is always a good thing. And I just mentioned the next one that comes on New Year's Eve. I'm just going to give your listeners and your viewers one little tip, and that is if you're going anywhere on New Year's Eve, and at the current way that this is moving, Storm Henk, if it will be named, you need to go early to avoid the higher winds and the rain that comes in. So if you're planning to travel New Year's Eve, it is better that you travel early as you can to get to your destination. And councils, if you're listening in, those Christmas tree lights and other things that you might have up, you might want to take them down in the next couple of days if what I'm seeing comes to fruition.
So we could have a rather significant storm on New Year's Eve, which is something to look forward to. Thanks, Jim, for that advice. Always great to speak.
Number 8 it will be.
Yeah, number 8, meteorologist Jim Dale, thank you as ever for your time. Well, there you go. New Year's Eve will bring yet another storm, Storm Hank, I think it was. Now, in a few minutes, we'll discuss the huge rise in shoplifting. I'm asking, why aren't the police doing more to stop it? But first, let's get your news headlines with Sam.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12:31. The headlines from the GB newsroom. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. It comes as reports have emerged that Downing Street is considering axing inheritance tax and reducing income tax. The move is one of a handful of attention-grabbing pledges that Number 10 hopes will boost Rishi Sunak's chances of a win. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has also suggested to The Times that the party will cut upfront costs for homeowners, first-time buyers and others looking to invest in property. That's in a pre-election giveaway. Thousands of travellers are facing delays, meanwhile, or cancellations as Storm Gerrit forces flights to be grounded. Earlier, 18 British Airways flights at Heathrow were axed. Meanwhile, multiple weather warnings are in place for wind and rain across the UK. Our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, is on the Dorset coast.
There are yellow weather warnings across the UK in the southeast, south, the west, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but not the central part of the UK. This is due to Storm Gerrit. Weather warnings in place until 6 p.m. today. For those who are travelling in places in Scotland, it's worth checking as some of the transport services have been disrupted today, so it's worth checking before you travel. And if you are heading on the roads, do expect speed restrictions due to the high wind levels. And if you're travelling from Southampton to the Isle of Wight, there are some minor disruptions and cancellations. Passengers being told to double check before they travel, as red funnel services are being affected today. But again, those weather warnings, the yellow weather warnings, are in place until 6 p.m.
And the number of people shopping in high street sales across the UK was down more than 20% on Boxing Day. Figures from MRI Software found that whilst footfall was up before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was significantly lower across the day as a whole. The group said the only location to experience an overall rise in high street visitors was in central London. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Now, this is shocking. The scale of the country's shoplifting epidemic has been laid bare. More than 200,000 shoplifting cases went unsolved in just 12 months. The Liberal Democrats, who have studied the statistics for England and Wales, accuse the government of totally failing to tackle a growing crime epidemic. They're not wrong, are they? I'm joined by former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. Peter, great to speak to you. What on earth is going on here? 200,000 cases unsolved.
And I'm entirely confident in saying that there are many, many other cases that do not feature as part of these statistics, because shopkeepers that I talk to have quite frankly given up on getting any kind of police response. So they manifestly do not report the cases because they see it as a complete and utter waste of time.
Yes, well, I'm not surprised. But what impact does this have on retail staff and business owners? Because we often talk about shoplifting as though it's a victimless crime or it's a low-level crime. But it must have a huge impact, not least when it comes to being, well, fear. Also, the bottom line, of course, it costs these businesses huge amounts of money. We've seen billions being lost to shoplifting, but also the fear factor. It's probably quite scary knowing that people are going to come in every day trying to nick things.
You've highlighted one of the really important aspects that runs parallel with this story, and that is assaults on retail staff and security staff. Over 800 retail staff, yes, 800, are assaulted every single day. And of course, that is utterly scandalous on many, many levels. And unfortunately, some major retailers instruct their staff now not to intervene with shoplifting because the risk of assault is so high. And therefore, some staff follow these non-intervention policies, security staff. So when you put all of these factors together, essentially what we have is a shoplifter's charter. And we see thieves entering stores repeatedly and just helping themselves with impunity, with nobody wanting to challenge and, quite frankly, no kind of police response if the retailers pick up the phone and dial 999.
Peter, have the people who are perpetrating this crime changed? Are we looking at more organised gangs or are we looking at more opportunists?
There is some complexity to the demographic that commit all this crime. Some people claim to be doing it out of poverty because they can't afford various things. You might see young mothers, for example, saying that they're stealing baby milk because they can't afford it. There are undoubtedly organised crime gangs who steal to order and do this for a living. And we see them quite often on CCTV or footage that's filmed by public-spirited people on their phones, where these thieves just enter stores and help themselves. The major retailers this year, Tesco, Co-op and others, have implored the government to do something. In other words, to stick their boot up the rear end of the police services of this country, and some have listened. But when we hear figures trailed that charges have increased to and are 3 times what they used to be, well, that really is no comfort whatsoever, because the previous figure was so lamentably low and remains astonishingly way beneath what it should be.
And Peter, what should the penalty be for shoplifting?
It's all about deterrence. There should be deterrence. If the police patrolled the streets and formed some kind of visible deterrent, that would help. If courts handed out suitable punishments instead of so often giving non-custodial sentences, community orders and the like, which are frequently ignored and tend often to be just a waste of time. And unfortunately, all of this contributes to the far bigger issue, and that is that our police are becoming increasingly irrelevant with regards to the crimes that affect the moderate mainstream of Britain. And that, of course, is deeply worrying.
Yes, because if you're making hundreds of pounds a day, which I believe some shoplifters can and are, a bit of community service isn't necessarily going to put you off when you're making such a profit, is it?
Absolutely, and this comes on the back of instructions being handed down to the courts, in fact legislation being pushed through Parliament no less, that will lead to less people receiving a sentence of 12 months or shorter. There has to be deterrence. If the possibility of running into that police officer as you legged it out of the store with your stolen goods was there, that would help. If all retail staff, security staff, had positive intervention policies whereby they detained people, they were suitably trained in the law and they were suitably robust in their attitudes, that would help. If shops were willing to assist the police in prosecutions, if we had more police officers, of course that would help. But quite frankly, at the moment, these kind of dreadful statistics just go to show that we are living in an increasingly lawless country, and we all suffer as a result of that.
And Peter, do you think we've got a broader cultural, societal issue that often youngsters feel they're going to get away with crime or they don't care for authority?
Yes, I think that is part of the problem. And I also fear that we have kind of a millennial generation now who have become so used to becoming victims of crime themselves or knowing people that are victims of crime amongst their peer groups and their friends, that there's almost an acceptance amongst many, many people in this country that crime is just something that happens, something you will inevitably become a victim of. And of course, crime irritates an old school copper like me, and it used to irritate many of my colleagues. And until we get back to having a mindset that crime is unacceptable, crime will not be tolerated, criminals will be prosecuted and suitably punished, then this matter is only going to get worse.
Well, I'm not sure anyone can disagree with that. Thank you very much, Peter Bexley, former Scotland Yard detective. Thank you for your time. Strong stuff. It is absolutely incredible that 200,000 shoplifting cases went unsolved in just 12 months. And as Peter says, those are just the ones that have been found. There may be hundreds of thousands more cases that haven't even been reported. Let me know if you've been impacted or your area has been impacted. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, it's emerged that a robot attacked an engineer in the United States. It was an incident that left a trail of blood. We'll get stuck into that, find out more. I'm Emily Carver. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. It's 12:42 in the afternoon. I'm Emily Carver and you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, at 1 o'clock, I'll be discussing Labour's plans to tackle the small boats crisis. That's as a government minister criticises Sir Keir Starmer for not having a plan, when the government at least does have the Rwanda plan. We've heard some rumours about Keir Starmer looking at offshore processing. Has he got anywhere with that? We'll find out. But if you're worried by the increased use of artificial intelligence and robots, this story won't do much to calm those fears. A Tesla engineer was attacked by a robot in an incident that reportedly left a trail of blood. The robot is said to have sunk its metal claws into the worker's back and arm. Scary stuff. I'm joined by AI expert Andrew Eborn. Andrew, this is like something out of a horror movie.
It certainly is, isn't it? And the joy of joining you in Twixmas sort of gets spoiled by this sort of story, doesn't it? It is the stuff of nightmares. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is what the headline would sort of have you believe. But actually, it broke in the Times a little bit earlier today, so it didn't quite make papers. And actually, if you dig a bit deeper into the story, I've got it here, they say basically the accident is the latest recorded at the company's Tesla Gigafactory, which is indeed in Texas, and 21 workers, out of every 21, one worker is injured last year. But if you dig a bit deeper, what actually happened, the robot itself was designed to move aluminium car parts and was supposed to be turned off while one of the workers did some maintenance. It wasn't turned off. So it's not the headline that people talk about where it's a machine tacking the worker. It's a normal sort of situation, which is an industrial injury as a result of the machine not being turned off.
So, Andrew, this is a story about human failure.
It is totally human error. And as you know, I'm Back to the Futurist. I talk around the world advocating the benefits of AI and robotics and how we should embrace it, because it's going to make everybody's life a lot easier. What you tend to find with any new technology, you get a lot of people who are scaremongering. And what they're doing, they're sort of turning around and saying, hang about, these machines are going to rise of the machine. It's going to come and attack us and get rid of all our jobs. Well, certainly, I mean, Goldman Sachs said about 300 million of our jobs will be lost to AI. But at the same time, there are tremendous benefits. I always basically say that AI, if you like, it's our greatest human achievement, but also potentially the biggest existential threat. But what we need to do is put the facts, do a little bit more light, shine light and less heat, I say, on the story. So this is not a story about AI turning bad. It's about human error.
But hang on, Andrew. Now, I'm not going to say it keeps me up at night, because that would be exaggerating, but I do worry sometimes about AI, because these robots, do they not learn exponentially? They learn in a different way than us. Aren't they already more clever than we are?
Oh, without doubt. ChatGPT, which celebrated its first birthday, hurrah, in November this year, can you believe it? They worked out that it's already passing bar exams, it's already passing medical exams. But chatting to ChatGPT is supposed to be better than chatting to your GP, because you can get an appointment, it's more empathetic and so on and so forth. Also, there's been seismic developments and advances in medicine. Lots of diseases are being cured as a result of artificial intelligence. And I predict that what's going to happen as well is you're going to get much more fake news. As you know, I do this regular feature here on this glorious channel called Fake or Fact, Andrew Eborn's Fake or Fact, and we look at a lot of those stories. And if you think about fake videos, you talk about sort of artificial created images, there's going to be lots of that, especially as next year we're going to have at least an election here, probably, as well as in the US. So expect to see a lot more of those.
Yes, it could definitely have an impact on our democracy, that's for sure. But hang on, aren't some of these AI boffins, the likes of Elon Musk, actually warning, hang on there, let's slow down with this, we're not sure what we're creating? Because if we're creating bots that are more clever than us, well, only a few steps away from them taking over.
No, absolutely. And I'm a musketeer. A lot of people have a go at Elon. And he came over to the great first ever worldwide AI safety summit, which we had right here in the UK at Bletchley Park, the home of where they cracked the Enigma code. And basically they said, absolutely, you have to understand the technology and make sure there are these safeguards in place to make that make sense. So absolutely, the way we're going to do, work out what the technology can do, work out how we can harness it, but beware of the risks as well.
Yes, well, what are the other risks that people are talking about? People are talking about AI being used in war, in conflict, and that could lead to very, very damaging consequences.
Well, they always say, and again in the Andrew Eborn's Fatal Fact, we've been looking at lots of these stories. The first casualty in war is always the truth. And whilst there are horrendous images coming out of not just Gaza, but also Ukraine still, a lot of those are artificially generated. I'll give you an example. Within 48 hours, I think it was, of the atrocity and a terrorist attack on the 7th, what happened is basically there were about 50 million posts on social media, a lot of them using artificial images, whether they were artificially created, showing people in rubble and so on and so forth, or actually what they call invented ones, where they got using old footage and relabeling it. So you have to, the best thing I advise everybody is question everything. There's going to be a lot of false information. We're drowning in a sea of information, most of which is false.
Well, there you go. A warning from Andrew Eborn to not believe all that you read or see. It could be done by a bot. Thank you very much indeed, AI expert Andrew Eborn. Always fantastic to talk to you. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about shoplifting in particular. It clearly is impacting you on your high street, at least. Julie's written in. She says, my niece works in a clothes boutique in Ipswich, regularly subjected to raids by Romanian gangs who just help themselves and run out again. This is organised crime. The police do nothing, she says. The stores are getting tougher to employ security staff. She says they should be arrested, charged and deported if they're not from this country. Strong stuff, but a lot of people would agree with you. Ian says, catch them and, well, I'm not going to read that out. It's a little bit rude, but let's just say he wants tough penalties for those who are nicking things in shops. Lots more coming in. Please do keep them coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com. Let me know if you or your family have been impacted by shoplifting. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that it has become somewhat of an epidemic. And also, let me know while you're at it whether Andrew Eborn has allayed your fears about artificial intelligence, or whether you're a little bit worried like me that they're getting a little bit too intelligent. Let me know, gbviews@gbnews.com. But the escalating conflict in the Middle East has sparked fears of a second cost of living crisis in Britain, experts have told GB News. As more drones are intercepted over the Red Sea, there are fresh warnings that oil shipments could cease, leading to a sharp rise in inflation. Joining me now to discuss this is GB News reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, what's been happening overnight in the region, and how crucially could this impact Brits?
Well, it's been a very busy period in the Gulf, especially surrounding areas in the Red Sea and indeed in Israel and Gaza over the Christmas period. On Monday, on Christmas Day, there was an attack on US forces in Iraq, on a base in the north in Erbil in Kurdistan, and they responded with strikes on Kataib Hezbollah, a paramilitary group in the country, after 3 US service personnel were injured, one of them critically. And then yesterday, we also had reports from the US that they had intercepted some 12 missiles and assets fired by the Houthis, an Iran-backed militia in Yemen, fired into the Red Sea, possibly at commercial shipping, also potentially heading north towards Israel. So a significant escalation in the conflict there, with the US launching just their 4th retaliatory strike on those Iran-backed militias. They've faced over 100 attacks since the war started on October the 7th. And experts have warned GB News this morning that this could lead to a second cost of living crisis if this escalation continues. That precarious shipping lane from the Suez Canal down into the Red Sea is where many of the world's goods transfers. Nearly $35 billion worth of goods were diverted in the week before Christmas due to these escalating naval pressures. That fear did ease in the Christmas period when the US-led naval coalition Operation Prosperity Guardian was deployed to that area. However, it has lacked full international support, many Arab countries not providing assets, the French and the Spanish reportedly not keen to be under full American command, and so the Americans are dealing with the bulk of that threat. The Houthis do pose a significant risk to commercial shipping. BP and Maersk have both halted their shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz into the Red Sea. And if that continues, and if these rocket attacks continue on commercial shipping, as we've seen in the last 48 hours, then there is a realistic possibility that further inflationary hits could occur back home in Britain.
Yes, so Charlie, just as the government are celebrating inflation being halved, inflation down, we could actually see it go right back up if this continues.
That's right, and there's no indication at this time that the Houthis are going to slow down their efforts. They are retaliating against what they describe as a blockade in Gaza and the Israeli war there. Last night, Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief of staff, said that the war would last for many months, indicating that Israel is not prepared to let up, suggesting that if that continues, the second-order effects will be more missiles, more drone attacks, and more conflict in the Red Sea, with commercial shipping and indeed British lives and interests at risk. But we could soon be feeling the effects of that in our pockets too.
Yes, it does look like this may well be a prolonged war in the Middle East, that's for sure. Thank you very much, Charlie Peters, our GB News reporter, bringing us the very latest from the Middle East. Well, Sir Keir Starmer, he's come under fire from a government minister over Labour's plans to tackle the migrant crisis. So what are his plans? We've heard about smashing the criminal gangs, of course we have, which the government would say they're also trying to do. We've heard about more cooperation with the European Union. Will we see that? And now we're hearing about offshore processing, but not a deportation plan like Rwanda. I'm Emily Carver. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Gerrit is bringing strong winds and gales to much of the UK through the rest of the day. Heavy rain and in some places heavy snowfall. And Gerrit moves across parts of northwest UK with its trailing weather fronts bringing outbreaks of heavy rain, and as that rain moves into cold air across northern Scotland, some significant snow above 200 metres and some blizzards and drifting of that snow as well, 20 centimetres plus over higher parts of northern Scotland. Heavy rain as well for many other parts of the UK sweeping through, followed by blustery showers and gales with 50 to 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts for southern coastal counties of England. Western parts as well seeing 50 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And the winds peaking across northern Scotland later in the day with the risk of 80 mile-per-hour wind gusts. So some treacherous conditions out there during the rest of Wednesday. Overnight it stays blustery with further showers coming in and the chance of 60 or even 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts in some of these showers across western parts. And, of course, with the wind and those showers, it's going to be generally frost-free, but we'll continue to see some snow over the hills of Scotland in those showers. And then as we start off Thursday, well, really, it's a very blustery day. It's less windy compared with Wednesday, but still a strong wind out there. Frequent showers or longer spells of rain. Still some hill snow across northern Scotland, but there will be some drier and brighter interludes in between the heavy showers.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 27th of December. Starmer's Migrant plan. The Labour leader told GB News last week that they could set up offshore asylum processing centres if they win the next election. But those plans have been criticised now by a government minister. Will they work? Storm Gerrit chaos. The Met Office has issued 9 yellow weather warnings across the UK as travellers are warned of potentially hazardous conditions on road and rail. And trans preschoolers. Official figures reveal more than 70 children aged just 3 and 4 have been sent to the controversial NHS Transgender clinic. Should there be an age limit on referrals? And get this, the comedian Ricky Gervais has come under fire yet again. This is about his latest Netflix special, which has been labelled by some as deeply problematic. A lot of what he says is deemed deeply problematic these days, but we'll find out why exactly now, later this hour. But before we get into that, let me know what you think also about all the stories we've been discussing. GBviews at gbnews.com. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Francis in the GB Newsroom. The headlines at 1. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has announced the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. It could be his last chance to introduce major tax and spending changes before the next general election. Well, it comes as reports have emerged that Downing Street could axe inheritance tax and reduce income tax. The move is just one of a handful of attention-grabbing pledges that Number 10 hopes will boost Rishi Sunak's chances of a win. Meanwhile, the Housing Secretary Michael Gove has hinted at a pre-election giveaway, suggesting that the party will cut costs for first-time homebuyers. Thousands of travellers are facing delays or cancellations as Storm Gerrit forces flights to be grounded. Earlier, 18 British Airways flights were axed from Heathrow. Meanwhile, multiple weather warnings are in place for wind and rain across the UK. Our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, is on the Dorset coast.
There are yellow weather warnings across the UK in the southeast, south, the west, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but not the central part of the UK. This is due to Storm Gerrit. Weather warnings in place until 6 p.m. today. For those who are travelling in places in Scotland, it's worth checking as some of the transport services have been disrupted today, so it's worth checking before you travel. And if you are heading on the roads, do expect speed restrictions due to the high wind levels. And if you're travelling from Southampton to the Isle of Wight, there are some minor disruptions and cancellations. Passengers being told to double check before they travel, as red funnel services are being affected today. But again, those weather warnings, the yellow weather warnings, are in place until 6 p.m.
Hospital car parking fees in England have risen more than 50% in the last year. That's according to new figures. Visitors and patients spent £146 million for parking in 2022 to 23. That's the equivalent of £400,000 spent in car parks every day. The data, which was uncovered by the Liberal Democrats, also found that parking fees paid by hospital staff has soared more than eightfold. It's up from £5.6 million to more than £46 million. Now, if you're into your wine, you will be soon able to buy new pint-sized bottles of still or sparkling wine as part of new post-Brexit freedoms. The new size will appear on supermarket shelves as well as pubs, clubs and in restaurants. The government says the move will offer more flexibility and choice for customers. Champagne pint bottles were sold in the UK until 1973, when Britain joined the European Common Market. But it stopped as they didn't comply with EU weights and measures. Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Business Kevin Hollinrake says the move will benefit everyone.
Well, I think it's a really important change. We used to be able to buy pints of champagne in bottles and wine, for example, before joining the European Union. So I think it's an opportunity for innovation. Churchill's favourite size of bottle. He said it was the right size for lunch for two or for dinner for one. So I think it's a nice innovation and something we can do now we've left the European Union.
Well, more than 200,000 shoplifting cases went unsolved in the space of just a year. New figures show only around 15% of the 362,000 cases were said to have resulted in a suspect being charged. The Liberal Democrats who studied the figures have accused the government of failing to tackle what they call an epidemic. A Home Office spokeswoman said charging rates for shoplifting are up by almost a third in the past year. The number of people shopping in high street sales across the UK was down by more than 20% on Boxing Day. Figures from MRI Software found that whilst footfall was up before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was significantly lower across the day as a whole. The group said the only location to experience an overall rise in high street visitors was in central London. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, digital radio and on your smart speaker. Now, though, more from Emily.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily Carver. Now we start with Sir Keir Starmer this hour. He's come under fire again over Labour's plans to tackle the migrant crisis. Now, Keir Starmer told GB News last week that he'd consider setting up offshore processing centres to deal with the surge in small boats crossings. But the Minister for Countering Illegal Immigration, Michael Tomlinson, says that is not a deterrent to stop the boats and simply will not work. And the former Minister, Brendan Clark-Smith, has accused Starmer of yet more flip-flopping. So let's dig into the detail here. I'm joined by GB News' political correspondent, Olivia Artley. Now, it was last week, I believe, that Sir Keir Starmer told Christopher Hope, our political editor, that they were considering offshore processing, also talking about smashing the gangs, and we've heard also about more cooperation with Europe. Will that or will that not work? Offshore processing, is that a change of tune from the Labour Party?
Well, it is a bit of a change of tune from the Labour Party. Keir Starmer is now under a lot of pressure to get his ducks in a row on illegal migration, as it were. A few months ago, he announced the sort of bare bones of his plan for tackling the problem, which was a returns agreement with the EU. Now, what that would entail is migrants who come to Britain's shores illegally from France would be sent back to France, but in exchange, the UK would be obliged to accept a quota quota of migrants who arrive on the EU's shores. Now, because Britain is quite a highly populated country compared to some of the other 27, that quota could end up being higher than the number of migrants who we are accepting at the moment. So Keir Starmer got a lot of criticism for that. Since then, he's been trying to sort of finesse and tweak that plan. And last week, as you say, he came up with this idea that he would process migrants offshore. Now, he made it very clear that, in his mind at least, processing migrants offshore is different to the Rwanda policy that Rishi Sunak has developed. Under Rishi Sunak's plan, migrants would not be able to come back to the UK even if their asylum claim was granted. They would be given leave to settle in Rwanda if their asylum leave was granted. If it isn't, they would be sent back to their home country. Keir Starmer says that under his plan, migrants could be processed offshore, though not in Rwanda. He says that he wants to rip up that plan. But then if their claim was accepted, they would be allowed to come back to the UK. Conservatives are suggesting that that wouldn't end up actually being a deterrent. It is a bit of a departure from what we've heard from Keir Starmer before. He has been very, very clear previously that the Rwanda policy is terrible, essentially, and that he would want to rip it up completely. Whether a different kind of offshore processing counts as ripping up completely sort of remains to be seen.
Yes, Olivia, it's quite difficult for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to land a punch against Sir Keir Starmer on the issue of immigration and the issue of illegal immigration because, of course, the Rwanda plan is yet to take off from the tarmac. So it's quite difficult for Rishi Sunak to criticise the Labour leader for not having a working plan.
Well, absolutely. And we are expecting the Rwanda policy to be bogged down in the House of Commons for a very long time. And then, of course, it will get to the Lords. And then we can expect it will probably end up getting to the courts. At the end of the last parliamentary term, I was in Parliament watching that first proper debate on Rwanda. And there were plenty of Conservative MPs from the right of the party mainly, though the left of the party also had concerns about the policy. Those from the right of the party agreed to support the Rwanda bill at the second stage, but made it very, very clear that come the third stage, come the report stage, which we can expect to be put forward in January or February at the latest, they will start making complaints, making amendments, and we could end up in a situation where we reach a sort of ping-pong place where it gets passed in the Commons, it goes to the Lords disagree, it goes back to the Commons, and essentially no flight will take off pretty much certainly before the next general election, which, as you say, makes it very, very difficult for Rishi Sunak to land any blow on Keir Starmer, which is a real shame for the Conservatives, actually, because illegal immigration is probably the area where Labour is weakest at the moment. This returns agreement with the EU is not likely to gain many plaudits from the public, given that it could end up with us accepting more migrants than we currently are. Keir Starmer said that he wants to smash up the people smuggling gangs with the help of France. Well, yes, the Conservatives would argue that's exactly what they've been trying to do for the last 13 years. And as for the rest of Keir Starmer's policy, it's actually pretty similar to the Conservatives, some sort of offshore processing. He said that he would keep the barges and temporary accommodation that the Conservatives have set up for allowing migrants to stay in the country while their claims are being processed. So it is a bit of a patchy record that Labour has so far on illegal migration. But as you say, there's not much the Conservatives can do with that.
And Olivia, am I right in thinking that Sir Keir Starmer said not too long ago that even if the Rwanda plan were to get off the ground and were to even work, he'd still scrap it?
He did. He absolutely said that. And he has been vehemently against the Rwanda plan from day one. Every single Labour MP voted against it. So to hear now that he is considering offshore processing, though he does make that distinction that migrants who have their claim accepted would be allowed to return to the UK, is quite an interesting turn up for the books.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you very much indeed, Olivia Utley, our political correspondent, joining us from Westminster. Thank you, Olivia, for your time, as always. Now, I'm joined by Kevin Marr, who is a former Labour advisor and is also the associate editor of Labour Uncut. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you had a lovely Christmas break.
I did, Emily. I hope you did too.
Thank you, I did. I was here, actually. But anyway, Kevin, so Labour, they sometimes tie themselves a little bit in knots. over immigration. There are people in the party who are very comfortable with high levels of immigration, quite a relaxed asylum system. Keir Starmer has to prove to the electorate that he can be trusted on getting tough on immigration, in particular illegal immigration. What do we know about this offshore processing?
Well, you're right. I mean, immigration is at the top of voters' concerns. It has been for quite some time. It has been probably for most of the last 20 years. It waxes and wanes a little bit, but it's a constant. And really, if you're a party of government, an aspirant party of government, you've got to address that. You've got to meet the public where they are. And the public is very concerned about the levels of migration that we've got in the country, the effects that has in terms of the culture of the country, the composition of the country, but also the kind of acute problems that that can be brought around by access to housing, access to public services, and the fact that we're now a country, a pretty small country with 67 million people on it and rising. So you've got to have a credible position on immigration, and as we've seen over the last few years with the kind of the trickle of people coming across the channel in inflatable boats, risking their lives to do so in the clutches of people traffickers and all the rest of it. But it's a problem that has to be dealt with, and it's got to be seen as a problem that you have to deal with and deal with directly. And this is a litmus test, really, for Labour and its credibility to govern. And this won't be lost on Keir Starmer, and it's not lost on his front bench, because they've got to come up with workable proposals that can convince the public that they will be able to be more effective than the government is at the moment. Yeah. It's fiendishly difficult. And anybody that thinks being Home Secretary, it's not a political point, but anybody who thinks that being Home Secretary is an easy job is deluding themselves. It's now an incredibly difficult job to deliver in, because you are hemmed in really on all sides. And I suspect Labour people are looking at some of the travails of Suella Braverman and Priti Patel and what have you in recent years and thinking, look, actually we could be facing some of these very same difficult issues if we're
because Kevin, so far it's appeared as though the Labour Party aren't comfortable with the word deterrent or the concept of a deterrent. We've heard instead that Keir Starmer will focus on smashing the criminal gangs. The government also say they're doing that. They say more cooperation with Europe. Again, the government say they also want to do that. Do they consider offshore processing to be a type of deterrent?
Absolutely, they do, and this is the paradox, really, that it doesn't matter whether you play for the red team or the blue team. The fact is, you're still dealing with the same very, very difficult issues with some fairly blunt instruments to try and address these problems, and it is very, very difficult. It will be difficult for a Labour government, just as it's difficult for this Conservative government as well. So I think point one almost is not to try and sound as though you've got a simple magic bullet that's going to address this problem at source and deal with it to the public's satisfaction, because you don't have that ability to do that, really. It's lots of small micro measures trying to kind of cut down on the pull factors that pull large numbers of migrants to this country and address those, and also address the push factors that are driving tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people from the places of where they're born into the West, into Europe. We've got to address that as well, and that's where it becomes fiendishly difficult, because that's an issue of global inequality and the fact that there's so many places in the world where people want to get out of there because the standard of living and their lives are pretty wretched there, and they see things in the West and think, well, even if it's tough for me, it's still better than what I've got. So we've got to address those push factors as well, and we've got to do that in concert with all our international partners, the European Union, America, the West, to be able to do that effectively, because what we're seeing at this point is nothing compared to what we may be seeing in 5, 10, 15 years' time.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. Kevin, do you think that Keir Starmer will actually make some policies to reduce legal migration? Do you think he's comfortable doing that? Will his backbench MPs support him on making some tough decisions when it comes to getting those numbers down?
I think so. One of the big talking points of this forthcoming general election is going to be the red wall, the so-called red wall, all those sort of once Labour citadels in the north of England and in the East and West Midlands that the Conservatives captured so effectively at the 2019 election, partly because of Brexit, partly because of Boris, partly because of perhaps Jeremy Corbyn as well, a bit of a mixture of all three, really. So lots of Conservative MPs in seats where Labour has got to win these places back. It's got to win them back wholesale. It's got to win a huge number of parliamentary seats back. And people in these kinds of constituencies, and particularly in the north of England, tend to be more economically radical, but more socially conservative. And in a sense, the kind of, the London liberal left and in the commentariat and in politics doesn't really speak to these people effectively. And I think Keir Starmer is very...
But isn't he, Kevin, isn't he a bit of an archetype of that type, really? I mean...
At one time, I think he probably was, but I suspect he's been on a bit of a learning curve here. I mean, he's employed people around him very much that get this issue. And I think if you listen to often what Keir Starmer's saying, he's trying to speak directly to these people to say...
So you think, Kevin, you think he's suddenly realised that those who are concerned by immigration aren't frothing at the mouth bigots?
Absolutely. I think the impression has often been given that people who are concerned about immigration and the effects that it has on our country are, it's code for being just a racist and a bigot and old-fashioned and what have you. And it isn't, because what we've seen with immigration over the last 25 years is its differential impacts on people. If you work in the public sector, if you work in the middle-class professions, having lots of people come to this country with their valuable skills never impacts you.
Yeah.
It impacts people who work on building sites. It impacts people who work in factories. It impacts people who've got pretty low bargaining power themselves. It impacts the self-employed. These are the people, particularly in the north of England, people with vans, people working for themselves. These are the people Labour needs to reconnect with to win back in big numbers.
Yeah, I'm worried, Kevin, that he'll say what he needs to. He'll say what he needs to get them on board, because the Conservatives have massively let down huge numbers of voters. He'll say what he needs to get them to vote for him, and then actually he'll shift back to the real Keir Starmer. But I guess time will tell. Kevin, maybe he is listening.
If he doesn't get to the next elections, I think he won't.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Kevin Marr, former Labour advisor and also the associate editor of Labour Uncut. Let me know at home if you what you think about this offshore processing plan that potentially Keir Starmer is going to unveil. I guess, would that actually stop the problem of the boats? Because I guess if you've got a legitimate claim, you'll still go on a boat to avoid going through the claim process. I don't know. Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you think that's a good alternative to the Rwanda plan? But anyway, you could start your new year with £10,000 in cash, a 500 quid shopping spree and a brand new iPhone. Sounds pretty good. Well, here's how you can make all of those prizes yours.
There's still time to become the winner of our Great British giveaway and take home nearly £12,000 of top prizes. There's cash to be won, £10,000 in tax-free cash that you could use to make 2024 the best year yet. There's also a shopping spree on us with £500 in vouchers to spend at the store of your choice. What's on your shopping list? If it's a new phone, we've got that covered too with our brand new iPhone 15 Pro Max. For another chance to win the iPhone, the vouchers and £10,000 cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB01 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 5th of January. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Well, winning that would certainly be a good start to the new year. Why not enter? Now, weather warnings are in place as Storm Gerrit sweeps across the country. Guess what? Another storm is going to hit the UK on New Year's Eve. Just what we need. I'm Emily Carver, and this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 1:24 in the afternoon. I'm Emily Carver and you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, in a few moments, we're going to discuss the new documentary that went behind the scenes of the King's coronation. Have you watched it yet? Let me know what you thought. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, if you're travelling home after Christmas, it might be a lot harder. As Storm Gerrit sweeps in across the UK, the Met Office is warning of wintry conditions, heavy rain, strong winds, disruption expected across the country. So joining us now is GB News national reporter Theo Giacomba, who's in Dover. Theo, is it windy? Is it blustery? Is there a storm on its way?
Well, the winds are certainly here already. If you were considering potentially coming out for a swim later on today, you may have to reconsider that, as there are wind speeds estimated of around 80 miles per hour today. There are yellow weather warnings within the UK in the southeast, south, in the parts of the West Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but it's not really affecting the central parts of the UK. And British Airways have announced earlier today that 18 flights have been cancelled. Some of those flights going into mainland Europe and towards different parts of the UK, such as Scotland. But those weather warnings are in place. There's not many people out today because of the weather. Normally you'd see places like this filled with people who are coming out for a stroll, taking their dogs out for a walk, still hanging out with their family and friends following the Christmas break. But today, though, the wind speeds here are pretty high. Waves have been crashing onto the sides here throughout the morning, and that is expected to stay in place until 6 p.m. today. And just finally, in Southampton, those who are looking to make their journeys towards the Isle of Wight and they're using Red Funnel or Red Jet services, they are being told to potentially see cancellations and delays. So it's worth checking just before you do travel due to those high wind speeds here across the UK.
Thank you, Theo Gicomba, who's in Dover for us. Well, I guess there's no excuse not to hunker down and watch GB News all day. Why not? The weather looks atrocious out there. Now, the Christmas TV schedule is bringing up a host of surprises. Last night, BBC One premiered a behind-the-scenes documentary focusing on King Charles's coronation year. The Princess Royal took a starring role, providing heartfelt commentary. We were given a bit of a fly-on-the-wall look at the life of the new monarch and his big day.
So, do we go and get ourselves organised down there?
Yeah. Someone, otherwise you get pulled over. Body.
There was just a really exciting moment of just getting them into that carriage the first time, and then we knew we were off.
And I thought back of, being 2 years old and watching the Queen's coronation, on a tiny black and white television. And there goes this golden coach with my sister in it. I can't explain the feeling because it's so surreal and this cannot be happening. Yeah, it was quite a moment.
We were ready. We were ready.
Right, well, there's a little clip from the BBC documentary on King Charles's first year. Now, I've got royal commentator Jenny Bond joining me now. Jenny, thank you very much. Now, I must admit, I haven't had a chance to watch the whole documentary yet, but I think I will later today. What have I missed?
It was quite long, actually, and some of the critics have said it's perhaps a little overlong, but it was a very interesting look behind the scenes. And it was a celebration, actually, not only of the royal family, but a celebration of all the work that went into the coronation. So we saw in great detail, the crown jeweller's work, the work of the embroiderers who made up the coronation robe for Camilla. But I mean, the most interesting bits, obviously, were those little bits of fly on the wall. We saw body language between members of the royal family, which we don't always see. We saw Kate being very deferential, observing protocol, kissing and then curtsying to Charles. And we saw, I think, the Princess Royal, as you said, had a starring role. We saw quite a lot of her, and I love the fact that after the coronation was over, she sort of marched in, wearing a uniform with trousers, marched in and said, "Oh, hello, old bean." And you could see that she and Charles get on brilliantly and how important she is to him as king.
Were there any surprises, Jenny? Any relationships that appeared different to what we've known before?
No, I don't think so. I think you just saw the real warmth of the family. And I think that, combined with the scenes on Christmas Day at Sandringham, show us a family that, despite all the problems and the rifts domestically with Harry and Meghan, the problems with Andrew, is united now in many ways. I mean, not with Harry, excluding Harry and Meghan, obviously, but there was a warmth about the whole family, including Mike Tindall, I think, who's got quite a lot of publicity because he put his arm almost in a sort of rugby tackle around George's neck, and his little daughter Mia was holding her cousin Louis's hand. They all get along fantastically well, and Mike Tindall is almost now, it seems, like the lost uncle. He's not an uncle to the Waleses' children. He's a cousin by marriage, but he's like the big uncle, and he's a good, fun uncle and a very, very good buddy stroke brother to William.
Jenny, why do you think they do these documentaries, just lastly?
They do them quite regularly. I mean, some people have said, oh, this is a strategy, it's a PR strategy, isn't it extraordinary? But they come out every few years, for big anniversaries. And it is partly PR, but it's mostly to allow us to see what goes on behind the scenes. And it doesn't do their image any harm at all, as we say.
No, certainly not. Thank you very much for joining me, Jenny Bond, royal commentator on that BBC documentary. Now, more than 70 children aged just 3 and 4 years old were sent to the controversial Tavistock Transgender clinic, statistics have shown. We'll get stuck into that after the break. This is Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News. It's your latest headlines.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Francis in the GB newsroom. The headlines this hour. First, some breaking news. A 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of arson following a fire at a school in West London earlier, the Metropolitan Police have said in the last few moments. 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters were called to the blaze at the London Oratory School at around 10 o'clock this morning. Part of the building has been damaged, but no injuries have been reported by the London Fire Brigade. And meanwhile, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced that the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. It comes as reports have emerged that Downing Street is considering axing inheritance tax and reducing income tax. Meanwhile, the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has hinted at pre-election giveaways, suggesting that the party will cut costs for first-time homebuyers. Thousands of travellers are facing delays or cancellations as Storm Gerrit forces flights to be grounded. Earlier, 18 British Airways flights at Heathrow were axed. Meanwhile, multiple weather warnings are in place for wind and rain across the UK, and ferries at Dover are facing up to 3 hours of delays. Our national reporter Theo Giacomba is at the scene.
There are yellow weather warnings across the UK in the southeast, south, the west, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but not the central part of the UK. This is due to Storm Gerrit. Weather warnings in place until 6 p.m. today. For those who are travelling in places in Scotland, it's worth checking as some of the transport services have been disrupted today, so it's worth checking before you travel. And if you are heading on the roads, do expect speed restrictions due to the high wind levels. And if you're travelling from Southampton to the Isle of Wight, there are some minor disruptions and cancellations. Passengers being told to double check before they travel, as red funnel services are being affected today. But again, those weather warnings, the yellow weather warnings, are in place until 6 p.m.
And the number of people shopping in high street sales across the UK was down more than 20% on Boxing Day. Figures from MRI Software found that whilst footfall was up before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was significantly lower across the day as a whole. The group said the only location to experience an overall rise in high street visitors was central London. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2745 and €1.1518. The price of gold is £1,622.70 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is 7,743 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Welcome back. It's 1:35. Now, it's emerged that dozens of 3 and 4-year-olds have been sent to the controversial NHS Transgender clinic. More than 70 preschoolers were referred to the Gender Identity Development Service just over the past decade. I'm joined by Stephanie Davies-Arai, who's the Director of Transgender Trend. Thank you very much for joining me, Stephanie. Were you surprised by these statistics?
No, we've known this for a while, that very young children have been referred to the Tavistock, and it's increased over the decade, I think, because of the direct targeting of the youngest children by activists. So we have around 60 picture books now for little children for the earliest ages, 3+. And of course, in primary schools now, it's also promoted the idea of gender identity. So parents now are in a position where they think their child has a problem, when actually it's just a normal part of childhood development.
Now, the NHS Trust that runs this service, they've said that no 3-year-olds would have received treatment, but there may have been sort of one-off discussions about their psychological state with the parents and the carers to provide some sort of support and advice. Is your concern that that would have included an affirmation that they are in fact born in the wrong body?
Well, we know that the Tavistock went more and more towards a gender affirmative approach, so we don't actually know what advice was given to parents. There was a documentary about the Tavistock a few years ago called The Gender Clinic, where it was seen clinicians giving advice to a 7-year-old boy, saying to him, "Do you think you'll always feel like a girl?" And of course he said yes. Even at 7 years old, which is what the NHS is proposing now, there is a problem there with how much children can understand. Of course, children think they will never change. The same as teenagers who are convinced they will absolutely never change. They will always be the same. But they're developing. It's childhood and adolescent development that we're looking at. The problem now is even if the age is increased to age 7 years old, because of all the activism, a lot of parents will think it's the best thing to socially transition their child. So to tell their little boy that, yes, he is really a girl if he feels that way. And so these children may be coming to the clinic for the first time at age 7, having been, that little boy having been told he's a girl for years by his parents, by his school, by his classmates. And so he arrives at the clinic fully convinced that he really is a girl. So actually, although, no children should be going to gender clinics, no child needs a gender clinic. I really think the NHS needs to do more work in training CAMs, clinicians, therapists, so that if parents are really worried about a child, they can access support in how to support that child to be what they really are, the sex that they really are, without confusing them that it is possible to change sex. So we need sensible advice from NHS clinicians in other areas so that children are not referred to gender clinics.
So, Stephanie, are you saying that no child of any age should visit such a clinic?
I don't think it is a place where certainly, from the evidence of the Tavistock, it's become so overtaken by an activist agenda, which is gender affirmation. I think that the new clinics that are being set up, according to the advice of Hilary Cass, who did the review of the Tavistock, sound much better in that those clinics will refer children to other services if they have underlying mental health issues, previous trauma, if they're autistic, if they're confused and depressed adolescents, then they can be referred to other ordinary mental health services. The number of children who...
Yes, Stephanie, that was one of the issues with the Tavistock clinic, wasn't it? That a child could have had all sorts of issues, perhaps there was autism or other mental health problems, yet they would, once they'd gone down the gender route, that would be the way they were treated, with little recognition of anything else that was going on. That was one of the major criticism, wasn't it?
Yes, Dr. Hilary Cass put it that as soon as the word gender was mentioned, then all other issues were ignored. So that led to what she termed diagnostic overshadowing. So mental health issues, for example, were ignored. Any kind of eating disorders or body dysmorphia or any reasons for that those feelings of gender distress were just ignored, and the child was encouraged towards a medical pathway, and that is what I think no child needs.
I mean, a lot of people will just be gobsmacked that a parent would take a child of age 3 and 4 to a gender clinic. But there you go, that's the state of affairs. Stephanie Davies-Array, who's the director of Transgender Trend, thank you very much indeed for your time. Now, a spokesman for the Tavistock Clinic said the GIDS pathway provides psychological assessment, treatment and support for families, so we are unable to provide figures on those who have undergone physical interventions. The outcome of gender identity development in younger prepubertal young people is uncertain, and so treatment is not provided. Most often there would be a one-off discussion with the parents or carers to provide support and advice. I guess the fear is that it sets a child, you know, on the track to then having a more medical intervention. But let's bring you some breaking news, and this might cheer Rishi Sunak up. Migrants did not cross the Channel over the Christmas period for the first time since current records began. According to Home Office figures, no Channel crossings took place on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day or Boxing Day this year. This is the first time this has happened since 2018. The number of crossings this year is 36% down compared to this time last year. The provisional total for 2023 is still lower than 30,000. So there you go, no Channel crossings over Christmas Eve, Christmas Day or Boxing Day this year. That's the first time this has happened since 2018. Hopefully we'll get some more information on why that might have been. Was it weather or was it some of the policies the government have implemented? We'll find out more. But pints of wine are going to be sold on British shelves for the first time ever. But we won't be getting imperial measurements back anytime soon. I'm Emily Carver and this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 1:46. I'm Emily Carver. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, at 2 o'clock, I'll ask whether the Tories are preparing to cut taxes in a big way, in a big pre-election tax giveaway. But joining me now to discuss some of the top stories today is Novara media journalist Michael Walker and the entrepreneur and reality TV star Aisling Horgan-Wallace. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. So let's start with the sometimes controversial issues of pints of wine. Is this a triumph, Michael?
Is it sometimes? Who's it controversial with?
To those who don't approve of drinking?
OK, potentially.
Or those who claim it's a Brexit win?
Well, to me, I suppose, I mean, I'm fine. I've got no opposition to pints of wine. It does seem a little bit like, you know, we had such a long political crisis, didn't we, when it came to Brexit? So much drama, and it seems a bit like we're sort of scraping the barrel for what possible benefits we might have.
Listen, small wins.
We did all of that for pints of wine.
No, well, I'm here for it. I'll raise a glass to it. I don't see anything wrong with it. I
don't see anything wrong with it.
I don't see anything wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's nice for people that maybe can't afford a whole bottle of fizz. Do you know what I mean? Get a smaller bottle.
I mean, it would be quite something. It would be quite something going into a supermarket and buying a pint, you know, for the first time.
Will it be quite... Come on.
Well, it's not going to be in a pint glass. It'll be in a bottle.
I'm not sure you believe what you're saying.
You can show that off on Instagram. Look, I've got my pint of champagne. No, Michael, not for you.
It's fine.
Well, you could pretend that you've had a massive bottle of champagne, but you've really just had the
Mediterranean. It's a carafe of wine, isn't it? Which is about a pint, I think.
A carafe of wine. See, we're in that period between Christmas and New Year, Michael, and it's worth making things sound more exciting than they are.
Well, I'm not playing ball here.
Well, personally, I cannot wait to go out and get a pint of Prosecco.
Yeah, me too. Go on, get me one as well.
Ashley's up for it. Excellent. But the return to imperial measures has been scrapped because no one wanted it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm so old-fashioned. I do everything old ways. I have to Google the new way of knowing metres and heights. And
really?
Yeah. I'm 45 tomorrow.
OK, I'm good for your age.
Yeah. Thank you, girl. I mean, boy.
I don't mind talking about these things.
Yeah, no, I'm really old-fashioned. I don't get any of it. I have to Google for the old way. I much prefer, you know, if I'm 5'8", I weigh 11 stone. Like,
it's strange because we do heights and weights. We do imperial, but like shop it, like for pasta, would you buy it in pounds? No, you'd buy it in 500
just look at it.
grams.
I look at it. If it looks big enough, I'm getting it.
Person.
Yeah, I'm literally so visual. I can't do the
Is this a miserable government failure, Michael?
No.
We were promised a change.
So I suppose what I would say here is that you've got a situation whereby we are in a cost of living crisis. Wages are no higher than they were 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The NHS is a complete mess, and then we had a whole news cycle about moving to imperial measurements, which no one cared about, and evidently no one wanted. Because it's not just that you said no one wants it. Sort of, it's literally, I think, 1.3% of respondents to the consultation said they'd like this to happen.
There's bigger things to be changed.
You don't normally get majorities that big.
A couple of days ago, I was reporting that, you know, British vineyards have had an exceptional bumper year, record levels of sparkling wine being sold, something like 20 million English bottles of wine being sold.
Probably climate change, isn't it?
Isn't that? Yes. Well, maybe.
Well, everyone's trying to buy the big bottles before they come out in pint size. Who knows?
But Kevin Hollinrake, who was a minister, claims the choice, this is over the pints, is a good thing. Should we have a little look at what he said?
We used to be able to do this before we joined the European Union. And why not is the big answer. Either at the moment you buy a bottle of wine, tends to be at 750 millilitres. A pint of wine is 568 millilitres. You can also be able to buy one at 500 millilitres. It's more freedom for producers. It's more freedom for consumers. We're all in favour of that.
Freedom to
Inspiring
choose.
stuff. Maybe I'll vote Conservative this time around and we can get some more sizes.
You know, Michael, it's easy to be cynical.
Could we have Twix bars 2/3 of the size that they already are? Sometimes it's just too much to handle.
Everything's shrinking, though, isn't it? Everything's shrinking.
Well, that's why you have those EU laws, actually, because businesses were just shrinking everything.
Well, actually, will the cost be the same? So there you go. If the cost is the same, then we're not winning, we're losing out. Shall we move towards more serious matters? And that is, of course, what's happening over in Israel and Gaza. Now, Israel readies for war on 7 fronts as attacks recorded in neighbouring countries. This is true. Israel has a lot of enemies.
I'm not surprised, though. Everyone's just absolutely sick of the destruction. You know, people are angry. People are going to want to fight against it. But how much proof is there that, you know, these latest attacks... There's not actually proof. It's just that Israel saying that they've been attacked, as far as I know.
Oh, yes, so you mean on the issue of this war on different fronts?
No, but well, we're talking about Israel is saying that they're under attack from obviously Gaza.
Yeah.
Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, Iraq, Yemen and Iran. My point is, Michael, that Israel has many enemies in the region and many different countries would potentially like to see it cease to exist. Is that fair to say?
Well, I don't think that's what we're looking at here. I think it would be a mistake to call this any kind of existential challenge to the existence of Israel. I think what you've got is...
Is not what happened on October the 7th an existential threat?
No. I mean, was 9/11 an existential threat to the existence of the United States? No. I mean, it was a terrible attack.
On their border, though.
It was a terrible attack, but it's not a threat to the existence of the state. I don't think any military analyst would argue that. I mean, I think what we're seeing now is you've got 20,000 civilians, or 20,000 people in total, sorry, have been killed. 2/3 of those women and children. And you've got many publics all around the world, but obviously especially in the Arab world, especially in the region, who are very, very angry about this. And that does put pressure on governments in the region to show that they are doing something to oppose what many scholars are calling genocide.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you do want to... I mean, we've also got Netanyahu now saying that he wants to basically clear out the population of Gaza, which would be incredibly destabilising for the region because you've got a lot of people who are very angry. The people of Gaza will be fairly radical at the moment. They're not going to be sort of saying, OK, let's just move to Egypt and start our lives. They're going to be trying to fight for their land back. That's what people tend to do when they get kicked off their land. So I think really what we need to see here is Israel to start behaving a bit more like a responsible nation instead of this sort of massive grenade in the middle of the Middle East.
Well, Israel have no intention to cease fire, Aisling. And they are saying, in fact, that this is not going to be a short war and that it's going to continue for months at least. Their sole aim, as they say, is to destroy Hamas, and to do so, it takes time.
I mean, I just think they were justified when they initially fought back, but now it's just gone on for too long. There's so much devastation as women and children, men. I just can't even watch it anymore. I can't even engage.
But they would argue that because Hamas is so embedded in the civilian population, it's extremely difficult for there to be no civilian casualties.
There must be another way, but there's too much civilian casualty. It doesn't weigh up. It's not fair, basically.
Right, well, we'll come back to this, because unfortunately we've run out of time this hour, but thank you very much indeed, Michael Walker from Novara Media, and also, of course, Aisling, I've forgotten your surname. I'm terribly sorry. My autocue was not in the right place for your surname. But anyway, the budget will be on the 6th of March. We'll get stuck into that in just a moment. I'm Emily Carver. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Gerrit is bringing strong winds and gales to much of the UK through the rest of the day. Heavy rain and in some places heavy snowfall. And Gerrit moves across parts of northwest UK with its trailing weather fronts bringing outbreaks of heavy rain, and as that rain moves into cold air across northern Scotland, some significant snow above 200 metres and some blizzards and drifting of that snow as well, 20 centimetres plus over higher parts of northern Scotland. Heavy rain as well for many other parts of the UK sweeping through, followed by blustery showers and gales with 50 to 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts for southern coastal counties of England. Western parts as well seeing 50 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And the winds peaking across northern Scotland later in the day with the risk of 80 mile-per-hour wind gusts. So some treacherous conditions out there during the rest of Wednesday. Overnight it stays blustery with further showers coming in and the chance of 60 or even 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts in some of these showers across western parts. And, of course, with the wind and those showers, it's going to be generally frost-free, but we'll continue to see some snow over the hills of Scotland in those showers. And then as we start off Thursday, well, really, it's a very blustery day. It's less windy compared with Wednesday, but still a strong wind out there. Frequent showers or longer spells of rain. Still some hill snow across northern Scotland, but there will be some drier and brighter interludes in between the heavy showers.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 27th of December. Rishi's spring giveaway. It's been announced today that the spring budget will take place on March the 6th. The Prime Minister is said to have demanded a gear change on tax as he looks to axing inheritance tax and shaking up income tax ahead of the next general election. Storm Gerrit chaos. The Met Office has issued 9 yellow weather warnings across the UK as travellers are warned of potentially hazardous conditions on road and rail. UK leads the way. We're the first country in the G20 to halve our carbon emissions. The Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, Claire Coutinho, says we're a world leader in tackling climate change. Well, there you go. comedian Ricky Gervais has caused quite the stir. His latest Netflix special has been deemed deeply problematic by some. What's problematic about it? Often his jokes are called problematic. We'll find out what's happened here later on in the hour. But first, it's your latest news headlines.
Emily, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Francis in the GB newsroom. The headlines at 2. A 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of arson following a fire at a school in West London. 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters were called to the blaze at the London Oratory School at around 10 o'clock this morning. The London Fire Brigade said that part of the building had been damaged, but no injuries have yet been reported. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has announced that the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on the 6th of March. It could be his last chance to introduce major tax and spending changes before the next general election. It comes as reports have emerged that Downing Street could axe inheritance tax and reduce income tax. The move is just one of a handful of attention-grabbing pledges that Number 10 hopes will boost Rishi Sunak's chances of a win. Meanwhile, the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has hinted at pre-election giveaways, suggesting the party will cut costs for first-time homebuyers. And thousands of travellers have been facing delays and cancellations as Storm Gerrit forces flights to be grounded. Earlier, 18 British Airways flights at Heathrow were axed, and multiple yellow weather warnings are in place across the UK. Well, our national reporter Theo Chikumba is in Dover for us. Theo, how are things where you are? Wet, by the looks of things.
Yes, well, in addition to those 18 flights which have been cancelled by British Airways at Heathrow Airport, in Scotland there have been some issues with transport in the Dumbarton area. A tree fell on the tracks earlier today, and then flooding caused further delays as well. There are gusts of up to 80 miles per hour throughout many parts of the UK. 9 yellow weather warnings until 6 p.m, so people are being advised to check before they travel. In Southampton, those looking to use the Red Funnel Red Jet services are being cautioned that there may be disruptions and cancellations, and those travelling in Portsmouth using hovercrafts are also being warned that there are further cancellation and disruption today.
Theo, thank you very much. Theo Chikumba there, live for us in Dover. Well, staying in Dover, ferry passengers are facing 3-hour delays at the port. They are facing high demand at the port as thousands of people make post-Christmas trips across the Channel. Those who miss booked ferries are being put onto the next sailing with space available. Enhanced passport checks by French border officials following the UK's withdrawal from the EU have significantly increased processing times. Downing Street says a suspected arson attack at the office of a Conservative MP, Mike Freer, is clearly concerning. Fire crews were called to the building in North London on Christmas Eve after it was partially damaged by the blaze. No one was in the building at the time of the incident, and the police say the investigation is ongoing. Hospital car parking fees in England have risen by more than 50% in just the last year. That's according to new figures. Visitors and patients spent £146 million for parking in 2022 to 23. That's the equivalent of £400,000 spent in hospital car parks every day. The data, which was uncovered by the Liberal Democrats, also found parking fees paid by hospital staff has soared by more than 8-fold. It's up from £5.6 million to more than £46 million. And Brits will soon be able to buy new pint-sized bottles of still and sparkling wine. That's as part of new post-Brexit freedoms. The new size of the wine will appear on supermarket shelves as well as in pubs, clubs and in restaurants. The government says the move will offer more flexibility and choice for customers. Champagne pint bottles were sold in the UK until 1973, when Britain joined the European Common Market. But it stopped as they didn't comply with EU weights and measures. Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Business, Kevin Hollinrake, says the move will benefit everyone.
Well, I think it's a really important change. We used to be able to buy pints of champagne in bottles and wine, for example, before joining the European Union. So I think it's an opportunity for innovation. Churchill's favourite size of bottle. He said it was the right size for lunch for 2 or for dinner for 1. So I think it's a nice innovation and something we can do now we've left the European Union.
Well, more than 200,000 shoplifting cases went unsolved in the space of a year. That's according to new figures that show only around 15% of some 362,000 cases were said to have resulted in a suspect being charged. The Liberal Democrats who studied the figures have accused the government of failing to tackle what they call an epidemic. A Home Office spokeswoman said charging rates for shoplifting are up by almost a third in the past year. This is GB News across the UK. We're on TV, in your car, digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, though, more from Emily.
Right, well, we start with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, who could cut taxes in March. It's in what's been termed a pre-election giveaway. Are tax cuts giveaways? I don't know. But Sunak's said to be considering a cut in both income tax as well as axing inheritance tax as the Tories look to cut Labour's rather big lead in the polls. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced this morning that the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. I'm joined by GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley to bring us up to date. Olivia, lots of talk about tax cuts in the papers this morning, and then the spring budget is announced for March the 6th.
Yeah, spring budget slightly earlier than in previous years, which is fueling speculation in Westminster that the Conservatives are gearing up for a May election rather than an autumn election, as had previously been thought. Lots and lots of speculation over the types of taxes that the Conservatives will cut. It is clear that they will start to do some serious tax cutting in the spring budget. Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak said right at the outset, when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister last October, that what they wanted to do was get inflation down, and once that was sorted, they would have the headroom to cut taxes. They will now argue that inflation is down. They have managed to halve inflation from about 10% at the end of last year to about 4% now, and they will now say that there is room for tax cuts. The types of tax cuts being discussed are a scrappage altogether of inheritance tax, which is something that polls very, very well and isn't actually that expensive for the Treasury, because although lots of people think that they will benefit from inheritance tax being scrapped, actually not really that many people do. So it might be quite a clever sort of trick that the Conservatives could pull there. Talk of other taxes being scrapped, talk of a cut or a complete overhaul of stamp duty. Lots of Conservative MPs feel that stamp duty really gums up the market, but there are those, tend to be on the left of the party, who don't think that that's an urgent tax to scrap, on the grounds that on the whole it usually benefits, as scrapping stamp duty would benefit those in London and the South East, because it only applies to properties worth over, I think it's £425,000. Talk as well, Michael Gove talking about helping first-time buyers with 30-year fixed-term mortgages, something that's very common in the US, but that isn't really done over here. Meanwhile, although this doesn't seem to be something that the Conservatives the Conservative government is actively considering for the spring budget, plenty of Conservative MPs on Twitter saying what they would like to see cut is or what they would like to see changed is the threshold at which income tax is paid. Those thresholds have been frozen for, I think it's 10 years now, and obviously against a backdrop of very, very high inflation, if you have a higher tax band at £50,000, for example, £50,000 10 years ago is not the same as what £50,000 is now. So actually those stealth taxes, as they're called, is what on the whole is making the average person poorer than they were 5 or 6 years ago. So could the Conservatives consider doing something about that in that spring budget? There is going to be a lot of speculation over the next few months, but what is certain is that the Conservatives are going to try as hard as they can to pull a rabbit or two out of the hat.
Yes, I mean, last time the Conservatives cut taxes back in November, sure, there were a few positive headlines, some of the papers saying this was a big win, national insurance cut, but there were a lot of people who were pointing to those income tax thresholds saying, hang on a minute, taxes haven't actually gone down when you look at the overall tax burden on working people. They need to switch up that narrative. They need to change that narrative if they want people to be convinced that they're the party of cutting taxes again.
Well, absolutely. Jeremy Hunt had some clever spin in the autumn statement in November. He essentially implied that the tax burden would be decreasing for the average person over the next couple of years, thanks to his 2p cut in national insurance tax. But if you actually dive into the figures, because those income tax thresholds are still frozen and because inflation is still doing what it does and raising prices, actually, all you can really say is that taxes are now rising less steeply than they would have been had Jeremy Hunt not introduced that cut to national insurance, which isn't quite as catchy and obviously isn't quite as beneficial for the average Brit. So yes, lots of Conservative MPs saying that if they really want to make a material difference, then what they need to do is remove those, is raise those income tax thresholds rather than tinkering around the edges with something like a scrap to inheritance tax.
Well, the hope is that they will make changes that will actually impact people and make the cost of living that bit easier, give people back some more disposable income. Sometimes changes are made that don't really have, they might make a good headline, but they don't really make that much of an impact to our wallets. So we wait till March the 6th to see what's happening. But I imagine there will be report after report after report showing us what the government is considering, what they may or may not go with. Thank you very much indeed, Olivia Rutley, GB News political correspondent, with the latest there from the government. What would you at home like to see Jeremy Hunt announce come March the 6th? Is there anything that could turn around the fate of the Conservatives? Around 15 to 20 points now behind the Labour Party. It's not looking good for the Conservative government. If they announced wide-ranging tax cuts, would that change your mind if you've turned your back on the Conservatives? Or is there anything that they could announce that would change the fate for Rishi Sunak? At the moment, it's going to be a tough task. But at the moment, our tax burden, let's remember, at a 70-year high. Can they get it down? That was Olivia Rutley, our GB News political correspondent. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.com. So, should Rishi Sunak cut taxes, and would it make much of a difference to the Tories' election chances? That is the question. I'm joined by Dr. Roger Gavolb, who's a former advisor to the Bank of England and the UK Treasury, so he knows his stuff. Roger, thank you very much for joining me. Good to see you as always. So we've got the announcement that the spring budget will now be on March the 6th, a little bit earlier than normal. We've got talk of a potential early election, although we don't know if the government will decide to hang on as long as possible before announcing that. And, of course, the papers full of ideas that the government are considering when it comes to tax cuts. What do you suspect will happen?
Well, I've been saying for a long time, Emily, a very, very long time, that despite all the protests that we can't have tax cuts, there will be tax cuts because these folks are really desperate. And these are the desperate, cynical actions of some people who are beyond unpopular. I think that Olivia is rather positive about the spin that they put out. I think she's right in using the words clever spin and clever tricks. And I think that the British public is sick and tired of seeing nothing but that from them. Cutting the inheritance tax is indeed a cynical move because it doesn't help that many people, although it's perceived as helping rather more. She's absolutely right, as I've been saying for a very, very long time. The only tax move that makes any sense to help us in this cost of living crisis is to move the tax threshold so that people don't suffer what's called fiscal drag. In other words, people on such low incomes that they don't pay tax now are dragged into the net, and people already paying tax pay more and more tax. You're quite right, Emily, that after the after the last autumn statement, actually, when Jeremy Hunt, who nobody believes about anything, I think, and whose popularity rating is minus 15%, said, these are the greatest tax cuts in a very long time. You're quite right. It actually was to have an effect of raising taxes to the highest level since 1948. I mean, it's ridiculous. These are desperate moves. I don't personally think it will save the Tories. I think we'll get Labour, who will probably leave the taxes where they are and introduce more measures that will further crash the housing and property market, and thus they will make property more accessible to first-time buyers because they'll become so much cheaper. Jordan Peterson, the noted analyst and psychologist, said the other day that if Labour gets in, Britain will become Venezuela for the next 20 years. He did say that, yeah. So I think it's moving the thresholds, which is the main thing. And I'm just afraid that nobody believes these folks anymore. They've lost so much credibility.
Well, Roger,
we will see what happens.
Roger, it's like you've snuck up behind me and read the inbox in front of me, because those are the two things that people are saying to me right now. One, don't trust the Conservatives anyway. And number two, they maybe will get my vote if they increase that tax threshold. And that seems to be the one that people want. But that is a lot more costly for the government, isn't it, Roger?
It is, but I think there are two things here. The first is what Bill Clinton said long ago. It's the economy, stupid. Because when you get to the voting booth, there's really only one thing people care about. It isn't immigration. It isn't Ukraine or Gaza or climate change. They care about how much money is in their pocket, Clinton said, how much the government is going to take in tax. Now, if they're smart, the Tories could save themselves possibly by some major cuts, starting with moving those thresholds. But it will cost them. And, you know, I've been saying also for a long time that all these huge tax increases by stealth have been to build up a war chest so they can make those cuts and surprise us all. But they've made so many mistakes, so many blunders, so many feet in the mouth, one after the other, that I don't actually know if it will save them.
You know, Roger, I'm in two minds about the importance of tax policy when it comes to where people put their cross at the ballot box, because I'm not sure, with the state of public services as they are and the narrative around the NHS being so negative, and also the reality of people's experiences and then failures with the immigration system, I disagree with you. I do think people will vote on that topic, although perhaps not if they consider that both Labour and the Conservatives aren't competent enough to solve those issues either. But I do wonder whether people think about public service spending more than they do tax cuts. What do you think?
I think that I can see your point, but I do feel strongly about this. More than 20% of people with mortgages have seen their mortgages rise by over £1,000 a month. Now, if you took that £1,000 away, I think the focus would come off these other issues to a large extent. But the second point that I wanted to make is that this government is so foolish in the way it's conducted itself. Olivia and others have, without even thinking about it, really conflated the fall in inflation with the actions of the government. This government, Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England, Sunak, Hunt, they have nothing to do with inflation falling. I've been saying this for a year. We have non-consumer-driven inflation. By raising interest rates 14 times, they have increased the inflation. This kind of inflation, cost-push inflation, falls by itself. They have prolonged the time when it's finally started to fall.
Yeah.
It's food and energy prices, not Hunt. Now, by allowing, even today, the Bank of England to keep interest rates where they are rather than reducing them, they are ruining the chances of everything they say they want to do. It's just stupid.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Roger Gewolb. And yes, you have been saying that for a long time. You've been saying it time and time again, but whether people are listening is another thing. Thank you very much, Dr. Roger Gewolb, who was a former advisor to the Bank of England and the UK Treasury. So he knows what he's talking about. Now, you could start your new year with £10,000. Now, you might need this if we don't get the tax cuts. So £10,000 in cash, a £500 shopping spree and a brand new iPhone. Sounds pretty good. Well, here's how you could make all of those prizes yours.
Make sure you don't miss your chance to win 3 brilliant prizes in our Great British Giveaway. Prizes which can make your new year start with a bang. There's a totally tax-free £10,000 cash to be won. Cash to spend however you like. What would you do with it? We'll also send you on a New Year shopping spree with £500 of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And if all of that wasn't enough, you'll also get a brand new iPhone 15 Pro Max. For another chance to win the iPhone, the vouchers and £10,000 cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB01, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 5th of January. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Well, there you go. You've got to be in it to win it, so that's how you enter the competition. Now, weather warnings are in place as Storm Gerrit sweeps across the country, and guess what? Yet another storm is going to hit the UK on New Year's Eve. We'll get more information for you as and when we get it. I'm Emily Carver, and this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
welcome back. It's 2:25 in the afternoon. I'm Emily Carver and you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll discuss the pro-Palestine protest that forced 2 stores at an East London shopping centre to close on Boxing Day. There you go. There's a little clip of what happened. But elsewhere, weather warnings are in place for wind and rain as Storm Gerrit sweeps across the country. According to the Environment Agency, 5 flood warnings are active in England, along with 100 lesser flood alerts. Train operator LNER has advised customers not to travel due to the severe weather. So there you go, more travel disruption. Joining us now is GB News reporter Jeff Moody in Portsmouth. Jeff, it looks like the weather's deteriorating where you are.
It is. I was just thinking 2 days ago I was sitting by a log fire with a mince pie, and now welcome back to work, Jeff. Yes, the weather is getting worse. It is deteriorating. I wouldn't say that it's a storm yet, but there are certainly plenty of storm warnings across the UK. Along the south coast in particular, we've heard that ferry services from Southampton to the Isle of Wight have been suspended. From of Wight, that's been suspended too. And then the same thing in Scotland. We've heard that there's terrible conditions in parts of Scotland. A tree is down on a line, Vermland line. That's been down for some time, which has been causing all sorts of problems with traffic. But as well as that, the problem is the wind. And the RAC is saying whatever you do, if you're out and about travelling, try to avoid rural roads because there's a very real risk of trees coming down, and also try to avoid coastal roads too because the waves can get pretty fierce. And of course all of this on the day that everyone is heading back from their Christmas breaks.
So Jeff, essentially what you're saying is that if you can help it, just stay at home and hunker down and watch GB News, really. Don't venture out.
Have another day of Christmas is the best thing to do.
Oh, no, Jeff.
Another day. I mean, this is traditionally the day that everyone heads home, but stay where you are today is my advice.
OK, then. There's the advice from Jeff Moody in Portsmouth. It's very blustery. He's got his hood up. We always send him out and about in the weather. Come what may, whatever the weather is giving us, he's there outside in his waterproof, ready to deliver us the very latest. So that was from Portsmouth, where the weather does look like it's deteriorating. But weather forecaster John Ketley joins me now. John, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you had a lovely Christmas. So this weather, this storm Gerrit, how bad is it in the scale of storms?
Well, it is what you'd call a typical British winter storm. It's not extreme by any means. We've seen winds gusting up to about 76 miles an hour over Scotland this morning, 83 miles an hour in North Wales in Snowdonia. So that's not that extreme, but of course it is widespread. So there's a widespread gale going on, and there's some heavy driving rain across many parts of the country as well. And there's a new line of squally winds coming across much of southern Britain just at the moment, with another one following across Ireland. So most places are going to see a real downpour of rain in the next few hours, and that storm centre continues to move across northern Scotland. It's brought some pretty nasty wintry weather this morning across, say, the Balmoral estate up in the north of Scotland. Plenty of heavy snowfall around there. And that low pressure is going to sit there for the next 24, 48 hours. So there'll be more strong winds to come during tomorrow, and not so much into Friday, but certainly tomorrow very windy and a lot of squally downpours coming through. The showers actually merging into some wetter spells along bands across the country from southwest to northeast. So this is Storm Gerrit, and as you've already hinted, really, Emily, there is some more stormy weather on the way. I reckon it's coming in during the 30th, that's Saturday, later on Saturday, and into New Year's Eve. And that one, if it's named by the Met Office or Meteran in Ireland, it should be called Storm Henk. So we wait with bated breath for that one.
Yes, Storm Henk. It is that's coming for New Year's Eve. Now, do we have any idea if that will be worse, more treacherous conditions than today's storm?
Well, at the moment, my trajectories would bring it across more central parts of the UK. So in essence, that's going to affect more of southern Britain. The fiercer winds will be down across England and Wales, perhaps, rather than up in the north of Scotland. But saying that, it's certainly going to turn colder as well. I mean, today's temperatures are quite respectable now. We're up into double figures across many parts of the UK, just up in the north of Scotland, where there's been that heavy snowfall but temperatures are beginning to rise a little bit there briefly. But I think at the end of the week and into Saturday, we are going to see temperatures dipping again. There will be some mild weather in the south, but on the whole, I think there's a greater chance of some snow in the mountainous areas, even of central UK, as we get through to the weekend. So it looks like an unusually cold start to the new year and a pretty stormy one. I hope that Jeremy Hunt doesn't start taxing us on stormy weather, because he's going to make a fortune out of this lot.
Well, if they can find a way, they'll find a way. Thank you very much, John Ketley, weather forecaster. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Now, in a few minutes, I'll tell you why the UK is being hailed as a world leader by a government minister. But first, it's the latest news headlines with Sam.
Emily, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 2:31. The headlines this hour. A 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of arson. That's following a fire at a school in West London. 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters were called to the blaze at the London Oratory School at around 10 o'clock this morning. The London Fire Brigade said part of the building has been damaged, but no injuries have been reported. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced the 2024 spring budget will be delivered on March the 6th. It comes as reports have emerged that Downing Street is considering axing inheritance tax and reducing income tax. Meanwhile, the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has hinted at a pre-election giveaway, suggesting the party will cut costs for first-time home buyers. Thousands of travellers are facing delays or cancellations as Storm Gerrit forces flights to be grounded. Earlier, 18 British Airways flights at Heathrow were axed. Meanwhile, multiple weather warnings are in place for wind and rain across the UK. Meanwhile, ferry passengers are facing up to 3 hours of delays at Dover Port. The port is facing high demand and thousands of people are making their post-Christmas trips. Those who miss booked ferries are being put onto the next sailing with space available. Enhanced passport checks by French border officials following the UK's withdrawal from the EU have significantly increased processing times. In the US, the Michigan Supreme Court has rejected an attempt to remove former President Donald Trump from the 2024 presidential ballot. According to reports, it's based on the US's constitutional insurrectionist ban. The ruling is in contrast with the recent court case in Colorado, where Mr. Trump was disqualified from running for president in the state due to his alleged role in the Capitol riots. That decision has been paused, though, pending an appeal. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Well, some fantastic news for those green-minded among you. The UK has reportedly become the first G20 country to halve its carbon emissions. The Secretary of State for Energy, Claire Coutinho, claims new data shows emissions have halved in the last 50 years. Now, according to the data that was published in The Spectator, Britain first reached the milestone in 2020 when the country locked down, understandably so, but has now hit the target again, even though the economy has opened up. So I'm joined by the Senior Lecturer in Natural Sciences at Bangor University, Dr. Christian Dunn. Christian, sounds like good news.
Yeah, without a doubt, it is good news. Let's take these numbers with a pinch of salt, because, for example, they don't include the carbon emissions which are produced offshore, so in other countries, and then those goods are then sent to us. We use them in this country, and so we need them, but it doesn't include those carbon emissions, and that obviously is increasing. Those sort of carbon emissions are increasing in developing countries. So that's the negative side. But come on, let's be positive. We are doing great work in this country at reducing our carbon emissions. So let's be thankful for that.
Well, yes. Does this just reflect the decline in carbon-intensive industries in this country, Christian?
Yeah, most certainly. That is the worry that it does. However, it does also, if you kind of start to dig down a little bit in the data and you look at kind of the amount of energy that's been using by households, things like that are declining as well. And that shows actually that some of our appliances and how our houses are being built is starting to be more energy efficient. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think obviously when it comes to kind of carbon emissions and net zero, it does become very polarized. On one side, people think we want to live in the dark ages and flagellate ourselves if we kind of use any resources. And the other side, they just want to kind of burn everything in oil, dolphins, whatever they want to. But it's not like that at all. This is a far more nuanced debate. And also there's many advantages for cutting our carbon emissions. And one of those is our pockets. If we have more efficient houses, more efficient ways of producing electricity, then that can ultimately save us money. So it has to be a good thing in many ways.
Well, is this data enough to silence the Extinction Rebellion types who often are out in protests, shutting roads down and the like?
I think there's little that will silence those sorts of people because, again, they're not looking at the nuance of the debate. They're very polarized. But we should, being pragmatic about this, it's good news. The numbers have to be taken with a pinch of salt, but there is still a lot of we have to do, and we must do that if we want to cut our carbon emissions, but also if we want to live in a better society as well, where things are more efficient, they're cheaper for us to use. There's so many advantages in this. It is not just about cutting carbon emissions. By cutting carbon emissions in the right way, we can actually build a better society for everybody.
Now, Christian, I must, before we depart ways, I must challenge the premise of this interview and say, well, perhaps it's not a good thing that we've halved our carbon emissions because it's meant some quite costly policies for people.
Yes, and this is then, again, we have to have this nuanced debate. There is no good and bad. Yes, of course, some of these processes that we've put in place to cut carbon emissions are going to cost money, but it's the investment side of things. If we invest money now, then long term, we will start to see savings. If you insulate your house, you have that initial outlay, and that hurts. Of course it hurts. But then longer term, you use less electricity or less gas to power your heating. You're going to use less. You're going to save money. And I think we have to look at this in that way. We have to invest in this for the benefits longer term. And the benefits longer term are huge. It's not just carbon, it's public health, all sorts of other issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've sometimes spoken to trade unionists who ask, where are all these green jobs that we've been promised? Where is this green revolution? We need the jobs that go with the net zero pledges as well, and they're not always available to the general public, but we're moving in the right direction. We're moving in the right direction. Thank you very much, Dr. Christian Dunn, Professor of Natural Science, Senior Lecturer in Natural Sciences at Bangor University. Good to chat with you. So there you go. The proof is there. First country in the G20 to halve our carbon emissions. Is that a good thing? Do you think we should have gone further? Do you think we've gone too far? Have net zero policies been too costly for our economy? Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. But also, do you find Ricky Gervais's comedy problematic? I must admit, I love Ricky Gervais. He's made some controversial jokes in his new show. We'll debate whether he's funny or is he just offensive. I'm Emily Carver and this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:42. Welcome back to my panel. Joining me to discuss some of today's top stories is Novara media journalist Michael Walker and the entrepreneur and reality TV star Aisling Horgan-Wallace. Thank you very much for coming back. Now, I want to get your opinion on Ricky Gervais. He's sometimes controversial, always funny in my view. He has a new special out. Ricky Gervais, and like much of his work, it's divided opinion. One particular joke about illegal migrants and Gary Lineker has sparked a bit of a backlash. See what you make of this.
Well, I am woke now, and I can prove it. Here you go. I love illegal immigrants. Yeah, sue me now. Sometimes I go down to Dover for the day, right? And I look out, right, and look for a boat, and I see a dinghy with about 60 of them, and I go over here, like, right? And I pull them into shore, and I go, women and children first. They go, there are no women and children. Just you lads, is it? Just, come on, lads. Come on, lads. If I go down there one day and there's no boat, I am absolutely gutted. I just sort of wander into town, and I stand by the traffic lights, and I wait for a big lorry to pull up, right? And I look underneath, and there's a lad sort of clutching like that. And I go, where you headed? And he goes, Gary Lineker's house. I go, it's just down there.
I heard a few giggles in the studio during that. I won't say who was laughing. I mean, it's just a bit funny, isn't it, Michael?
I thought the Gary Lineker joke was naff. I think the punchline didn't work.
I don't get the Gary Lineker reference.
Well, it's
what
just
am I
like
missing?
Gary Lineker tweets about refugees, and so refugees are going to Gary Lineker's house. It's like,
right, okay.
Seems
well,
a little
funny.
bit. Is it? Well,
He had a couple of, as I understand it, Gary Lineker had a couple of refugees stay with him for a period of time, right?
Wow.
But also, as I understand, Ricky Gervais and Gary Lineker have had a bit of back and forth on Twitter in the past.
Then it
So
makes
he's
sense.
having a little bit of a jab at him. But I mean, people say, you know, he's offensive, but this particular Netflix special that's just been out since Christmas Day, I think, it's trending #1 in most countries in the world, Michael.
Well, I suppose that was probably the intention, wasn't it? I mean, I assume sort of like he writes his jokes because he wants to trend #1 on Twitter, so he has to say something that he thinks is going to be
Well, also, and I just
controversial
think
enough to
that-
get people talking.
Yeah, and I think comedy comedy it does push the boundaries, and it's always going to offend somebody somewhere. So, you know, some snowflake somewhere will be crying about somebody's joke at some point, but that's what comedy is. You know, it's gonna push the boundaries and make you think differently maybe sometimes about subjects that are important. I think it's a bit of a power play when people get offended in a kind of performative way. It's, if enough of us get offended, we can bring you down, Ricky. But unfortunately for them, Ricky is too big to be cancelled.
Well, it always just works the other way around, doesn't it? That's why I think.
Not always.
Well, who are we talking about?
We're
thinking Dan Wootton and the other fella.
There will always
the
be
one that backfired.
There will always be a platform for people, sure, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on whatever. Yeah. But you can lose out on, you know, mainstream gigs quite easily just for saying something.
Yeah, well, it's difficult
wrong,
to say. I suppose there are jokes sort of that would have been told in the 70s and 80s, and even to be honest, like 10 years ago. That sort of like now as a society we've decided, actually, you know, that is a bit cheap. It's a bit mean.
That's true, but then where do you draw the line? Like, because you can't stifle everyone's speech so much, and nothing's funny then.
Yeah.
But also,
you know,
funny.
Ricky Gervais might have been making fun there of people who are outraged by illegal immigration. He could have been actually poking fun at those who think it's a huge problem.
I thought it could have gone either way, with how you take it.
No?
Yeah. I think probably he was. I mean, who knows? I thought the first line was delivered well. The line about women and children was delivered well. The line about Gary Lineker, I thought, was delivered
giggle
poorly.
from Michael Walker there.
On the first one, yeah, I was saying.
He has a sense of humour. Some left-wingers do. I'm joking. Right, let's move on, because government by WhatsApp. What do you make of government by WhatsApp? Sir David Omond tells Parliamentary Inquiry the platform should be restricted because it is inappropriate for decision-making in government. As we know, during the pandemic, we've seen so many messages in that COVID inquiry conducted by WhatsApp, a lot of very serious things.
And a lot of WhatsApps being deleted through COVID, which is the danger of using WhatsApp. And I think that, you know, messages can be misconstrued. You don't know the tone of the person's voice. I just think it's an awful idea that the government are using WhatsApp. Perhaps in COVID you can understand why it happened, that, you know, we weren't allowed to see each other, etc. Not that all the rules were always abided to. But, yeah, there's such a danger. I mean, controlling the country by WhatsApp, you could leave your phone somewhere. It's a risk. Somebody could pick it up and know everything. You know, just read your WhatsApps and that's it.
You make a good point, but I think, Michael, I think some of our ministers and politicians and civil servants won't be using WhatsApp in the future simply because it may end up being read out in an inquiry as evidence against you.
Well, I think they've all...
Unless you delete it, sorry.
Well, I think they've all turned on automatic deletion, haven't they? So you can have a setting where after 7 days it gets deleted, which I think they're all doing now anyway. I mean, this story, I think, is about the national security risk.
Yeah,
so people at GCHQ saying you should be using something a bit more you know, secure. Although I can't really imagine that the sort of the internal government platforms particularly secure, because they're not particularly competent at these kind of things, are they?
Well, this is the thing. Isn't WhatsApp actually one of the most secure
They can move to Signal,
messaging
maybe,
platforms?
I don't know.
Signal.
Not if you leave your phone somewhere and someone picks it up and reads your WhatsApp messages.
Well, there you go. But then I imagine they all have Face ID. But I don't know. But I mean, I think a lot of people were shocked just by how much government business was done via WhatsApp on iPhones.
Yeah, I'm not really. I mean, I speak to my colleagues on WhatsApp. I mean, you don't want...
About issues of national security?
Oh, we're talking about all sorts of issues of national... We're trying to undermine it at my organisation.
You said it.
Some big companies don't even allow their employees to have WhatsApp, full stop. So I think the government should not be using WhatsApp.
There is an issue with this kind of... So there was always... It's called the productivity puzzle. Why did the internet and everything not increase our productivity by a significant degree? And sort of the leading theory at the moment is that it did make us more productive in some ways, but it made us less productive in others because we're so distracted. We're constantly on Slack, we're constantly on WhatsApp. So maybe deleting it would just be good for...
Yeah, it definitely has made us stupider. And language is shorter. You know,
and people don't read as much. They don't do their own research as much, relying on, you know...
We don't even type it anymore. We can just speak it and it types it for us. It's definitely made us lazy. Made me lazier.
Shall we move on to something else that I know makes a lot of people angry? Not that I want to make you angry. But NHS parking charges. Now, during the pandemic, the government stopped these charges. But they come back. And since then, Apparently, £146 million has been spent by patients and visitors just on car parking last year. Now, that's a 50% rise in just 12 months. Now, Michael, perhaps this could be framed as a good thing because it's money towards the NHS.
Yeah, well, I think you've got I think some kind of charging for car parking is probably legitimate in the sense that you don't want everyone in a town centre starting to use the hospital car park just to go to the shops. So having some system where it's not a free-for-all makes sense. I think the big problem, though, is when it is used as an alternative means of funding the NHS. Because the whole point of funding NHS through proportional taxation is that wealthy people spend more, we all put in money. The idea that we fund the NHS by charging care workers and people with sick relatives, to me seems like the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be having a fair society whereby the rich pay more, the healthy sort of pay, you know, towards the care for the sick. And we seem to be making the sick pay more and doctors and nurses pay more and healthcare workers pay more, which seems like the wrong way around.
Do you think patients and workers should have to pay for parking outside hospitals?
Definitely not. And I mean, I've got an example. I rushed a friend to hospital, to A&E, and he ended up having a double bypass.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was really, really serious.
I hope it's okay.
And the last thing, he's fine now. The last thing I was thinking about was, oh, am I going to get a ticket? I got a ticket. But, you know, it's ridiculous. What was I supposed to do? Not rush him in and not, you know...
Yeah, spend time at the machine or downloading the app.
Yeah, I think it's really awful. I think there needs to be a system. You're right, if it does generate money for the NHS, then great. But I thought some of them were private firms that just took the money themselves. I wasn't sure if it all went to the NHS.
Well, I don't know if it all goes to the NHS, but I do know that they use private companies to get with the fines. So they can be quite aggressive.
Very aggressive. And most people are going to the hospital. Well, all people are going to the hospital. Usually a stressful situation, unless, you know, it's a new life, you're having a new baby, that's different. It's a joyous situation, but to then have the worry of getting a ticket on top of that, and you're on low income, I think it's atrocious. They need to scrap it.
Especially as you have to wait 2 hours for an ambulance anyway.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in most workplaces you do get free parking, do you not?
I can't drive, so I've never looked up the policies.
You work in central London, you wouldn't know. But I do think in most workplaces you get a parking permit.
Did you get free parking here? I know you drove here.
No, I didn't.
Practice what you preach here at GBNews.
Yeah, I don't know, because most car parks in hospitals, you know, they're not that big. So I just feel like there should be a reserved area, especially for emergencies. And, you know, you can prove that on the way out. You shouldn't have to stand around and look for pay machines and worry about that when you've got an actual emergency on your hands. You need someone to go into emergency care.
Also, what often happens is that those who are senior in the business or if we're talking about the private sector, they get special car parking and then the rest have to pay. So there you go. That's the evils of hierarchy, Michael, for you. The richer ones get free parking and the poorer ones get no parking, get costly parking. Well, thank you very much. And just now, Martin Daubney has appeared.
As if by magic.
As if by magic.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Did you have a nice Christmas?
I did. Quite
That's what
relaxing.
I asked for.
Yeah, quite relaxing. But your Christmas wish came true.
Thank you very much.
Quite nice.
Michael's in an exceptionally good mood, I must say.
Yeah, are you still drinking?
I'm well rested.
I gave him some Bailey's cake, that's why.
Right, tell us what's coming up.
Right, so the budget's come in. Can anything save the Tories? Any tax cut on the world? I think maybe it's too late. We'll have to wait and see. No dinghies arrived for the first time since records began, 2018, not long ago. What's the reason?
Only over Christmas.
Exactly. Christmas.
What's the reason? The clue, nothing to do with the Tories. Driverless cars will be allowed on the roads by the end of 2026, and you'll be allowed to drive no-handed, breakthrough, or an accident waiting to happen. And Donald Trump's touching Christmas message to his rivals: rot in hell.
Goodness me.
Seriously.
Well, it sounds like a varied and punchy show as ever.
It is.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much to Michael Walker and also to Aisling Horgan-Wallace. You've been fantastic. That's all from me today. That's the end of Good Afternoon Britain for now. I'll be back tomorrow from 12 till 3 o'clock. Thank you to my panel. Martin Daubney is next. He's got a rip-roarer of a show for you.
Brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Gerrit will continue to bring wet and windy weather to the UK for the rest of today, with heavy snow in northern Scotland, so some treacherous conditions out there. Now, the worst of the wind and rain has eased for the time being across England, Wales, southern Scotland, but another bout of wet and windy weather moves into West Wales, northwest England. Through the evening, 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts, but 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts across the far north of Scotland, combined with heavy snow, blizzards over hills and drifting as well. Through the night, the wind does ease a little and there'll be less rain about, but still some showers coming in from the west and enough of a breeze, of course, to keep the frost away. So a mild start in the south, still on the cold side across parts of Scotland, where there will continue to be hill snow into Thursday and outbreaks of rain at lower levels. Strong winds continue across the country with 40 to 50 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy bursts of rain, some longer spells of rain in places, for example, the south and southeast by the end of the afternoon. It's mild in the south, 11 or 12 Celsius, but mid-single figures further north and colder than that over the hills. Friday does start off with some sunshine. It's still blustery out there and there are still quite a number of showers around, particularly in the north and the west. In between the showers, some sunny spells, but on the chilly side and into the weekend, further hill snow in the north, wet and windy weather elsewhere.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to GB News.